Hey everyone, welcome to Mr. Creepiness Uncut, my second channel for all things raw, creepy, and straight to the point. If you came from the main channel, I'm glad you're here. Make sure to subscribe, like the video, and let's dive into the story. We were on our way back from a long trip, me and Rosa, when we saw this small roadside diner just off one of the big highways. It looked old, but open, and we were both tired. The kind of tired that makes you start snapping at each other over nothing. The sun was already down, and we hadn't eaten anything decent since early morning, so we figured we'd stop, get some food, stretch our legs. There were a few vans parked outside, and an old pickup truck with peeling paint. I noticed a man inside the truck, wearing a faded cap. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, but his eyes were locked on us the second we pulled in. I glanced at Rosa. She didn't seem to notice. We got out of the car, and I felt his stare on my back. It made the hairs on my neck stand up for a second, but I told myself I was just exhausted. Maybe he was just zoning out, looking at nothing. I didn't say anything to Rosa. Inside, the place smelled like fried dough and cheap coffee. It wasn't fancy, just one of those classic places with a long counter, sticky menus, and red vinyl booths. The waitresses moved fast behind the grill. Rosa ordered some eggs and toast, and I just stared at the menu, not really reading it. I picked something simple. Our table was next to the window, so I could still see the parking lot. The pickup truck was still out there. The man hadn't left. A couple of times I thought I saw him lean out of the window, like he was checking something. I tried not to look too much. Didn't want Rosa to pick up on it. She was tired too, and the last thing we needed was to spook each other over nothing. We started talking about the trip, stuff we bought, stupid things we forgot to pack. I laughed at something she said, and for a moment, I forgot about the man. Then the door of the diner creaked open, just a little, like someone wasn't sure if they were coming in or not. I looked up. There was a column near the door, and for a second, I saw the shadow of someone moving behind it. Then he stepped into view. Same man from the truck. He paused for a beat, his eyes going over the room. When he saw us, he didn't react. Just walked slowly toward an empty table across the room and sat down. He didn't order anything, just sat there. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about the way he moved was off, like he was too calm. Rosa got up to go get extra sauce from the counter, and I stayed behind, pretending to check my phone. I could feel his eyes on me, even though he wasn't facing directly at our table. He was angled just enough to watch without being obvious. I glanced his way, then quickly looked back down. He didn't look away. His cap was still on, pulled low, and his hands were resting on the table like he was waiting. Not for food, though. Just waiting. The waitress passed by him twice, asked if he needed anything, but he shook his head both times. The food came. Pancakes and eggs. Some toast. It smelled good, but I'd lost my appetite. Rosa came back with the sauce, chatting like nothing was wrong. I nodded along, kept my tone normal, but my eyes kept drifting back to the man. He hadn't moved. Just sat still, watching. I told Rosa I was heading to the restroom, hoping that a splash of water on my face would help clear my head. The corridor leading to the back of the diner was narrow and nearly empty, with just a single flickering overhead light casting dull shadows along the floor. My steps echoed faintly on the linoleum, and when I reached the women's restroom, I noticed the silence. Too quiet for a place still full of customers. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small, just 2 stalls and a single sink under a cracked mirror. The door creaked behind me but didn't fully shut. That's when I heard it. Slow, cautious footsteps in the hallway. I froze. The sound was too deliberate, like someone trying not to be noticed. I turned toward the mirror and caught a glimpse of the entrance. That cap. That same faded cap just visible for a second before the door opened wider. He stepped inside like he belonged there, eyes scanning lazily around the room like he was confused about where he was. But there were only 2 stalls, clearly marked. There was no confusion. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask what he was doing. I just moved slowly toward the wall, keeping the sink between us. He stepped in further, then stopped as if debating what to do next. His hand twitched near his jacket pocket. He took a few more steps, now facing the mirror too. I could see his face. Blank. Not angry. Not smiling. Just watching me through the glass, like he was studying how I reacted. I didn't move. I tried to keep my breathing steady, knowing that if I panicked, it might tip something over in him. Then a voice rang out from the hallway. Rosa's voice. "Hey, you good in there?" It cut through the tension like a blade. The man blinked and stepped back, almost casually. Without a word, he turned and walked out. I stood still for a few seconds, listening for more footsteps, making sure he was gone before I unlocked the stall and slipped out. When I came back into the hallway, Rosa was already looking at me with questions in her eyes. We went straight back to the table. My hands were shaking when I picked up my fork. I leaned in and told Rosa everything, my voice low. Her eyes widened as she glanced across the diner. The man was back in the main room, seated at the same table, acting like he'd never moved. She whispered that he had been watching us the whole time I was gone. Every time she looked over, his eyes were locked on our table. That was when the manager came by. He noticed something was off. Maybe it was the way I kept looking over my shoulder, or how pale Rosa looked. He asked quietly if everything was okay. I didn't go into details, just told him someone was making us uncomfortable. He nodded and stepped away without a word. A few minutes later, we saw him behind the counter, talking to someone on the phone. Then suddenly, the man was gone. Not like he got up and left through the main entrance. Just gone. One of the waitresses said she saw someone go through the back, past the kitchen, but wasn't sure who. We didn't follow. We didn't want to be anywhere near him. The cops came pretty fast. We stepped outside to meet them. They checked the parking lot first, but there was no sign of the pickup truck. No tire tracks. Nothing. They checked the cameras. The footage showed the man slipping out through the kitchen exit and disappearing into the alley behind the diner. It was grainy, and all you could see was his silhouette. Tall, broad shoulders. That cap. Then he vanished into the dark. Rosa asked one of the officers if it was possible he was still nearby, waiting. Maybe watching the diner from further down the road. The officer just said, "Could be. We see more of this stuff lately. People looking for easy targets on long stretches between towns." That hit hard. We hadn't thought of ourselves as targets. The officers took our statements, asked for descriptions, and told us to be careful heading home. They said some of these guys don't do anything the first time. They just watch. They wait to follow. That thought stuck in my head. The idea that he hadn't finished whatever he started. We got back on the road, but it wasn't the same. Every time we passed a car parked on the shoulder, I slowed down. Every time headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, my heart kicked up a gear. We stopped only at brightly lit gas stations, staying in sight of other people. We didn't speak much after that. I never saw the pickup truck again. But that feeling, that someone was watching, followed me all the way home. Even when we pulled into my driveway and locked the doors, I still checked the street twice before going inside. That night, I double-checked the windows, kept my phone close. I didn't sleep well. A few days later, I saw a short piece on the news. A man in a truck matching the one we saw had been reported near another rest stop, bothering a couple of girls traveling alone. Nothing happened, they said. He just stared too long, parked too close. The description was vague. No name, no arrest. I looked over at Rosa, who had stayed the night. She was watching the same report, not saying a word. Later, she told me she'd canceled her weekend trip. Said she didn't want to drive at night anymore. Me? I keep my car doors locked now, even when I'm inside. And if I have to stop while driving alone, I make sure it's at a real place. Somewhere with people, cameras, lights. I don't take chances with random diners anymore. That night showed me how fast normal can turn. How you can be laughing over toast one minute and the next, trying to keep someone from cornering you in a restroom. Sometimes the quiet places are the ones where bad things wait. I go to evening classes and work part-time at a 24-hour convenience store. That day, I stayed late to help close out the registers and tidy up the shelves. By the time I finally left, it was past midnight. I figured I'd just walk home since it was only a few blocks away. The streets were mostly empty, streetlights flickering weakly above cracked pavement. A couple of cars passed now and then, but no one stopped. I put on my headphones, not even to listen to music, just to shut out the dead silence around me. I kept my pace fast. My backpack was heavy, pulling at one shoulder, and I kept one hand on the strap. After maybe 5 minutes of walking, I heard the sputter of an old engine behind me. It wasn't loud, but something about it made me turn around. A small, beat-up scooter was coming closer, its headlights weak. It slowed down right in front of me and stopped. 2 men jumped off. They wore dark hoodies, hoods pulled low over their heads. One of them, the taller one, kept his right hand in his pocket like he was gripping something. His stance looked off, not casual, but tight, like he was waiting for something to kick off. I took a step back, but didn't run. My first thought was, maybe they were going to ask for directions or something stupid like that. But then the tall one pointed straight at me and motioned with his free hand like he was demanding something. His voice came out loud and sharp. "Bag and phone, now." He said it again, adding, "Don't play smart. I got iron in my pocket." I froze. It didn't feel real. He was looking straight at me, eyes barely visible under the hood. His hand didn't come out of the pocket right away, but it moved, pressing against the fabric like he was ready to pull something out. The street was still dead quiet. No one around. Not even the sound of a dog barking or a window opening. I turned my head quickly, scanning the sidewalks and buildings. Nothing. Just parked cars and closed shutters. My breathing got short, and I couldn't hear anything in my ears anymore even though the headphones were still in. My legs were locked. I didn't move when he stepped closer. Then he pulled out the object from his pocket. It looked like a gun. Old and scratched up, but it had a barrel, and he pointed it at me with one hand. The second guy, shorter, started pacing in a small circle near the scooter, glancing up and down the street like he expected someone to walk out of the shadows. He kept muttering something I couldn't catch, tapping his foot against the sidewalk like he wanted to get it over with fast. He didn't look confident, more like he was about to bolt if anything went wrong. I kept my hands where they could see them, but I didn't reach for my bag. I couldn't think clearly, just running through a loop in my head. Do I give it to them? Do I run? Do I scream? I couldn't move. My mouth was dry. I looked straight at the guy with the gun, and before I even realized what I was doing, I yelled out, "No!" It came out sharp and loud, way louder than I meant. The moment I shouted, he pulled the trigger. There was a dry click, no shot, no recoil, just that sound, like metal hitting metal. For a second, no one moved. It felt like everything froze. The street, the air, even my own heartbeat. The two of them looked at each other fast, eyes wide. That's when I knew it. The gun didn't work. Either it was broken or wasn't loaded. Their expressions changed in an instant, from control to confusion, then to panic. The guy with the fake gun clenched his jaw and backed away, and the other one started muttering something urgent. "Let's go," the second guy said. His voice cracked. He looked over his shoulder again and yanked at the scooter. The taller one jumped on behind him, still holding the useless gun in his lap, and they sped off into the narrow alley. The engine sputtered as they disappeared down the block. I just stood there on the sidewalk, knees locked, still holding my bag against my chest like a shield. My breathing was sharp and uneven. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I looked down and realized I almost dropped my bag without noticing. I stayed like that for a few more seconds, trying to convince myself it was over. I could still feel the cold imprint of fear in my chest. I made myself move. One step, then another, and then I broke into a run. I didn't care who saw me or how loud my steps were. I just needed to get somewhere with lights and people. The nearest pharmacy was only 2 blocks away. I pushed the door open with both hands and stumbled inside. A guy behind the counter, probably early 20s, looked up from his phone. His eyes widened when he saw me. I guess I looked worse than I thought. "You okay?" he asked, standing up quick. "Water," I said, my voice hoarse. He handed me a bottle from the fridge behind him without even asking for payment. I sat down on one of the waiting chairs near the counter, forcing the cap off with both hands. It took me a full minute before I could think straight enough to pull out my phone. I called my cousin first, then my brother. I didn't want to sound dramatic, just needed someone to know I was all right. They offered to come pick me up right away. While I waited, the pharmacy guy helped me call the police. The patrol showed up pretty fast, maybe 10 minutes later. 2 officers, one older, one younger. They asked me to walk them through what happened, and I tried to explain everything in the right order. What the guys looked like, what the scooter sounded like, even the way the gun looked when it clicked. They asked me to go over it twice. I could tell they were trying to piece together anything useful. But it was dark. The helmets and hoods made it hard to see faces. I told them about the alley they went down and the direction they came from. They said they'd checked the street cameras, but warned me that a lot of the nearby ones had poor angles or were out of service. They left me with a case number and a number to call in case I remembered anything else. I thanked them and left with my brother, who had pulled up just as they were finishing their report. He didn't say much, just kept looking at me like he couldn't believe it. Honestly, I couldn't either. They didn't get anything from me. Not even my phone. But the fact that they tried, that the gun could have been real, kept circling in my mind. It wasn't over just because they left. I took a few days off everything. Couldn't focus in class. Couldn't sleep right. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the barrel of that gun, heard that dry snap. I didn't know if it was better or worse that it didn't fire. It made it feel more real, not less. My aunt offered to let me stay with her for a while. My brother even suggested I move to a different place altogether, maybe closer to campus. But I didn't want to run from it. After a week, I forced myself to go back to my normal schedule. I still walked, but only during the day. When classes ended late, I asked friends to walk me part of the way. I stayed alert, paid more attention to the people around me. Even little things, footsteps behind me, a car slowing down, made my body tense up. Sometimes I'd hear a scooter engine in the distance, and my whole chest would go tight. I'd turn around without thinking. Usually it was just a delivery guy or someone passing through. But the sound hit the same nerve every time. I've tried to tell myself that it was a one-time thing, that the chances of it happening again are low, But that night's always there, sitting in the back of my mind. A few weeks ago, the local precinct officer called to follow up. He told me that incidents like mine had dropped in the area. Maybe it meant the guys got scared off. Maybe they moved somewhere else. Or maybe they just got lucky that night and didn't get caught. He reminded me not to get careless. I said I wouldn't. I don't think I ever will. That night taught me how fast everything can change. How you can go from walking home to standing in front of a gun in seconds. And how even when nothing ends up stolen, something gets taken anyway. I'm a first-year student at a local college, and in the evenings, I work as a front desk assistant at a dance studio. The pay isn't great, but I like the energy of the place. People coming in and out, music in the background, everyone busy with something. It felt safe, normal. I'd bring my laptop sometimes and do homework between classes or help restock towels. One evening during a slow shift, I got bored and decided to pull a little harmless prank. There's this big sports complex across the street from our studio, and I thought it'd be funny to leave a fake business card there. I made it on my phone real quick, just a name I made up, and my real number, under the title, Beginner Personal Trainer, Cheap Rates, Quick Results. It was a joke. I didn't even expect anyone to call. The idea made me laugh at the time. I printed 2 copies at the studio printer and left one on the info table in the sports complex lobby the next morning when I stopped by for coffee. That was it. 2 days later, my phone started buzzing non-stop. At first, it was 1 or 2 unknown numbers calling, but I ignored them. Then came the texts. Dozens of them. Most were weird, short messages like, "You still training?" Or, "What's your rate for private sessions?" Then some started turning inappropriate. One said, "Bet you look better out of uniform." Another just had an address with no message. The tone was getting more aggressive by the hour. One guy kept sending over and over again after I didn't reply. At first, I tried responding politely. I told a few people that I wasn't a trainer, that there had been a mistake. A couple apologized, but most didn't stop. I blocked 3 numbers the first day. But as soon as I did, more texts came in from different numbers. Some of the messages seemed like they were written by the same person, just using different phones. They'd use similar phrases, same spelling mistakes, and weird emojis. After a few days, it wasn't just messages anymore. Someone started tagging me in comments on Instagram. I checked and saw a fake account with my name, my photos, and a bio that read, "Fitness lover, open to private sessions, DM for details." My profile was private, so at first I thought maybe someone just used pictures from my profile pic. But then I saw one of me at the beach with my friends, one that I knew I never posted. It was from a shared folder my roommate and I had from last summer. That's when it really sank in that something was wrong. This wasn't just prank calls. Someone had access to personal stuff that wasn't even online. The only way they could have gotten those pictures was from inside my phone, or maybe from my email where we used to share vacation photos back and forth. I remembered I used to use the same password for everything back in high school. Gmail, Instagram, Dropbox. I never changed it because nothing bad had ever happened before. I locked my phone and sat in the corner of the studio's back room. The music outside was blasting from Zumba class, but it felt like it was coming from underwater. I opened every account I had, Instagram, Gmail, my old Yahoo I hadn't used in a year. Then I went into password reset mode. New passwords for everything, 2-factor authentication, security questions, even apps I barely used. I didn't want to take any chances. By the time I was done, it was past 10 p.m. The last student had left, and the studio lights were dimmed. I locked the front door, closed the register, and headed home, checking over my shoulder more than usual. I reached out to a friend who's good with computers. She came over with her laptop and some software to scan my system. We sat in my kitchen while the program ran, the hum of the fridge the only sound between us. After about an hour, she said she didn't see any clear spyware or Trojans on my laptop, but when she started checking my social media logins and activity logs, things got worse. My main Instagram account showed logins from locations I'd never been to. Someone had already changed recovery options on 2 of my secondary emails. I wouldn't have even noticed if she didn't know where to look. Then came the moment that made my stomach drop. She opened a tab and showed me a post made from my Instagram account 2 days ago, something I'd never written. It was a fitness tip with a personal story that sounded just real enough to be believable, along with a new photo, one I'd never uploaded. It was from a party last semester. Nothing scandalous, just me sitting on the kitchen counter in someone's apartment. But I remembered that picture being in a locked album I shared only with close friends. Later that night, I found a thread on some anonymous forum where people were commenting on me. Someone had posted my full name, the city I lived in, and part of my home address. There were screenshots of my stories, including old ones I didn't even think were saved, and someone had edited a few photos to make them look more provocative. The comments underneath were the worst part. Men asking if I took private requests. Others debating if I was real or another tease. Some called me names, laughed about how easy it was to find my stuff. Messages started flooding in again, this time with threats. One account messaged, "We're watching you. Close your curtains." I froze. I lived alone. I hadn't told anyone that except my closest circle. Another said, "Party girl with secrets. You'll pay for lying." I didn't know if it was real or just trying to scare me, but I stopped sleeping. I unplugged my TV in case there were hidden cameras. I started wondering if I'd been followed. It felt like I wasn't dealing with one person anymore. It was like a group, coordinated or not, feeding off each other. Someone had a mission to ruin me. And all of this, every thread, led back to that stupid business card I left for a joke. From a number, they had traced my accounts, scraped whatever they could from the internet, and filled in the rest with imagination and malice. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up early one morning and went to the local cybercrime office. They had a small team, just 2 people there when I arrived. I filed a formal complaint and gave them everything. Screenshots, the fake accounts, timestamps, all the numbers that had messaged me. One of the officers told me cases like mine were hard to trace because the attackers used VPNs and burner phones and sometimes operated from other countries. Still, he said they'd look into it. He also gave me some advice: shut everything down. Social media, email, messaging apps, anything that could be tracked or used to reach me. And change my phone number. He warned that it would be isolating, but it was the best move if I wanted peace. That night, I sat with my phone in hand for hours before deleting each account. Instagram, gone. Facebook, gone. I backed up some photos first, but only to a flash drive I kept offline. I set up a new number and didn't give it to anyone except my mom, my sister, and my best friend. I even closed my main email, the one I'd had since I was 14. The silence that followed was surreal. No notifications, no buzzing at random hours. But also, no group chats, no event invites, no sharing songs or memes. I didn't realize how much of my daily life had been tied to all those platforms until I cut them off. I felt like I'd lost a part of myself, but it was also the first time in weeks that I didn't feel watched. The police said they found no leads. Whoever was behind it was either too careful or too lucky. No fingerprints left. Nothing conclusive enough to go after. The only thing they could do was log my report in case it escalated again. I was told to stay offline and stay alert, so I stayed off. I stopped using public Wi-Fi. I got a second phone for work-related stuff. I created a new email that didn't have my name in it. For banking, I set up two-factor with a separate device. Everything was fragmented on purpose. Months passed, and it got quiet. No more posts. No more new fakes. I met friends in person or used encrypted chats that auto-deleted messages. My life became small, more private, and a little paranoid, but it was safe. Even now, I still check online every few weeks, just to see if something new pops up. A new profile, a photo, a rumor. So far, nothing. But I never fully relax. I don't post anything personal anymore. I don't tag locations. I don't share real-time updates. That part of me, the version that trusted the internet, is gone. The people who did it were never found. I doubt they ever will be. Maybe they moved on to someone else. Maybe it was just a sick hobby. I don't care anymore. What I do know is this. All it took was one mistake. One joke. One card left on a table. And everything changed. Now, I'll never risk it again. We didn't expect anything unusual to happen that week. Me, Alan, and Nate just wanted a calm break away from everything. My grandpa built this small wooden cabin years ago, tucked right beside a quiet lake. Hardly any tourists ever came here. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything we needed. A small kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a deck that looked out over the water. During the first few days, we just swam, grilled some fish, and sat around drinking cheap beer. There wasn't even cell service out here, and that honestly made it better. We played cards, read books, and just enjoyed the kind of silence you never get in the city. The cabin stood close to the tree line. In the mornings, you could hear birds chirping and leaves rustling when the breeze picked up. I'd been there enough times growing up that those sounds felt normal, even comforting. The first 3 days were clear and warm. We even built a small fire pit by the lake and stayed up late talking nonsense. Everything felt simple, no drama, no stress. Just 3 guys trying to escape the noise for a week. On the 4th day, things started to shift. The air felt heavier all afternoon, like it was holding something back. Around evening, the wind picked up hard, and the sky turned dark fast. Clouds rolled over the lake like thick smoke. Within half an hour, rain was hammering down so loud it drowned out our voices. We moved inside, shut the windows, and gathered around the small table in the main room. Alan pulled out some old board games from the closet, and we tried to ignore the noise outside. Lightning started to flash every few minutes. Each one lit up the room for a split second, like someone flipping a giant light switch. The power began cutting in and out. The first time it happened, we just laughed. But when it kept happening, we got the candles out. There were a few thick ones in the drawer by the sink, and we lit 3, placing them around the room. The candlelight gave everything a flickering orange glow. The wind was still howling through the trees outside, and every now and then, something thudded against the roof. We told ourselves it was just branches or pine cones. Then came a lightning strike that hit real close. The whole room turned white for a second. I turned toward the window instinctively, and that's when I saw it, just barely, through the blur of rain and the quick flash of light. A figure, standing near the big oak tree by the path that led to the lake. I froze for a second, thinking maybe it was just a trick of the light or a shape made by the branches. But the next flash came just 10 seconds later, and this time I was sure. There was someone standing there, not moving, just facing the cabin. They wore a raincoat or poncho with the hood pulled up. Couldn't make out the face. They were too far to see clearly, maybe 15, 20 feet from the edge of the trees, just standing still, watching, not walking, not looking around, just still. I whispered for Alan and Nate to come over. They stopped arguing over the game and came to the window. I pointed at the tree and said, "There's someone out there." But by the time the next lightning hit, the figure was gone. Alan squinted into the dark and said, "Probably just a hiker caught in the storm. Maybe they're looking for shelter." Nate didn't say anything. He was still peering out the window, breathing a little heavier than normal. I didn't feel right about it. People didn't just show up out here. The road was rough, and even Google Maps barely had this area marked. You had to really know where you were going to find this place. We hadn't seen another soul in 4 days, not even a boat on the lake. And if it was just someone passing through, why the hell were they standing still like that, not waving or calling for help? I checked the front door. Still locked. Curtains pulled halfway. We sat back down, but the game didn't continue. Alan tried to crack a joke, something about campfire stories and serial killers, but it fell flat. Nobody laughed. Then another flash came. My eyes shot back to the window without thinking. Nothing there. Just rain. I kept watching anyway, hoping not to see anything again. Hoping it really was nothing. But deep down, I knew we weren't alone anymore. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped out onto the porch. The rain hit my face hard, and the beam of light shook a little in my hand. I called out, loud enough to be heard over the storm. "Hey, you okay? You need help?" No answer. Just the rain hammering the roof and splashing off the deck. Then, from the bushes to the left, I heard a rustling. Quick, like something or someone ducking down. I aimed the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing. Just wet leaves and moving shadows. For a second, everything went still again. The kind of quiet that makes you hold your breath without realizing. Then Nate yelled from inside, "I saw light! There! Deeper in the trees!" I stepped back toward the door, and we all stared into the forest. Another flash of lightning lit everything up. About 30 feet in, I caught it too. Something reflecting light. It could have been metal, maybe from another flashlight, or just water bouncing off something shiny. But it was moving. "Why's he not answering?" Alan said. His voice wasn't loud. More like a whisper he didn't mean to say out loud. I shook my head. There wasn't any logic to this. If it was someone lost, they'd want help. They'd be calling out. But this person stayed quiet, watching, moving only when we didn't look. We tried calling again, but still no response. Finally, we shut the door and locked it. We went around checking every window and door, pulling the curtains and sliding chairs under the handles where we could. Phones were useless, no bars, and even emergency calls wouldn't go through. The storm had taken everything out. We couldn't even check the weather. We stayed in the living room, lights dimmed, waiting. The lightning kept coming, sometimes so bright it lit the whole cabin for a second. Every time, I looked toward the windows, afraid I'd see that figure again. But I didn't. We didn't try to sleep. Just waited. Listened. Watched. At some point in the night, Alan rigged up a little trap by the back door. He tied some empty beer bottles to a string and stretched it across the doorway, just in case someone tried to come in. It clinked every time the wind blew too hard, but no one touched it. We sat close to the fireplace even though it was off. No one wanted to go to the bedrooms. I kept hearing sounds, branches snapping, something thudding against the wall, maybe an animal brushing past. But none of it was clear. We were all on edge, flinching at every new noise. I don't know if we slept at all. Time passed so slowly, I thought it was still night, even when it was already morning. When daylight finally pushed through the trees, the rain slowed down to a drizzle. Everything outside looked gray and heavy. We grabbed our jackets and carefully opened the door. The ground was soaked, puddles everywhere. The forest didn't look peaceful anymore, just cold and dripping. We walked around the cabin, eyes scanning the tree line, looking for anything. Near the back, Alan spotted it first. Deep footprints in the mud, much larger than ours. They went in several directions, like someone had paced back and forth or circled the cabin. Some prints led toward the trees, then looped back to the lake. Near one of the logs by the fire pit, we found a torn piece of dark fabric, soaked and stuck to the bark. Looked like it came from a coat or jacket. Same dark color we'd seen in the storm. "He was out here the whole time," Nate muttered. His voice sounded distant, like he wasn't ready to believe it himself. We didn't waste time. We used one of the phones to call the local ranger station. This time the call went through. Took about an hour for 2 officers to arrive. They were polite, professional. Asked us to show them the footprints and the cloth. One of them knelt by the tracks and said they matched common hiking boots. Nothing illegal about that. The other officer looked around, said, "It's not unheard of for people to wander close to cabins during storms. Maybe someone was disoriented. Maybe someone set up camp nearby." We told them the person didn't ask for help, didn't respond, and clearly tried to avoid being seen. They nodded but didn't say much. They said they'd log the visit and check nearby trails but didn't promise anything more. Without a crime or missing person report, there wasn't much they could do. That didn't make us feel better. We went back inside and looked around. The place felt smaller now, like it couldn't protect us if something actually happened. Nobody said it out loud, but we were done. We packed up in silence, threw everything in the bags, shut all the windows, and locked the doors behind us. Nate double-checked the back, even though Alan's bottle alarm had stayed untouched all night. Driving out, the road was slick and filled with puddles. Trees on both sides leaned in like a tunnel. None of us talked much. I kept thinking about those footsteps, that torn cloth. Why would someone stand in the rain for hours and not speak a word? Alan said maybe next time we should bring more people. Make it a bigger group. Safer. I nodded, but I knew I probably wouldn't come back. Not the same way anyway. That place didn't feel safe anymore. Whatever peace I'd felt there before was gone. Nate, who's usually the loudest, the one who jokes around even when things get tense, just stared out the window the whole drive back. Didn't make a sound. We left that place behind us. Wet trees, cold air, and the silence of something watching us that night. I worked the night shift at a small 24-hour diner not far from where I go to school in the evenings. It's nothing fancy, just one of those places where the coffee tastes burnt after midnight and the lights hum a little too loud. Most of the people who come in are truck drivers, warehouse guys from across the street, or the occasional traveler looking for something hot and quick. That night, I was covering for a coworker who called out, so I started closer to midnight than usual. The place was quiet, same as always. No music, just the buzz from the fridge behind the counter and the occasional car passing outside. I passed time by flipping through my textbooks, trying to stay awake and maybe learn something. Every now and then, I'd look up at the windows, out onto the parking lot, which was dim and mostly empty. I'd sometimes think how easy it would be for something bad to happen. We had a basic alarm system, a few cameras, but nobody really checked if they worked. The cook had left earlier, like he usually did when business was slow, and it was just me behind the counter, locked in from inside with nothing but the smell of stale fryer oil and reheated soup. What made it feel a little safer was the building across the street. It was a security company, just a small local firm with a glowing sign and 2 guys who took turns walking around outside. I didn't know them, but I liked seeing the movement now and then. Just enough to remind me someone else was awake. Around 3:30 a.m., maybe an hour before my shift ended, I saw someone outside. He wasn't coming in right away. He stood by the glass door, looking left and right like he wasn't sure about something. The way he moved wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't casual either. He was a middle-aged man in a blue windbreaker that looked a size too big, hands in his pockets. After a moment, he stepped inside, making the bell above the door ring. I stood up straight, tried to sound upbeat like I always do. A friendly voice sometimes got me a tip, and more importantly, helped me figure out if someone was trouble. He asked for a big sandwich, said he was starving after a long drive. I asked if he wanted tea or coffee with that, mostly just to keep the interaction going. He mumbled something I didn't catch, didn't look up, just kept staring at the counter, the wall behind me, the chairs, the floor, everywhere but at me. His eyes were scanning too much, not like someone hungry, more like someone counting exits. I tried not to let it show that I noticed. I figured maybe he was just tired. People are weird at that hour. Maybe he was coming off something, maybe just introverted. I went behind the counter, started putting the sandwich together, slow and methodical, watching him in the reflection of the microwave door. He hadn't sat down. He was still standing, just inside the entrance, like he wasn't sure if he wanted to stay. I asked if he wanted anything else, loud enough that he'd have to say something. He blinked like I woke him up. Then he shook his head, still not meeting my eyes, and stepped closer to the counter. Not a normal step. Too quiet. I felt a bit colder, even though nothing in the room had changed. I kept my hands moving. Lettuce, tomato, turkey slices, but my eyes flicked to the small red button under the register. We weren't trained for emergencies. Not really. Just told to press it if something felt wrong. I didn't press it. He asked if we were always this empty at night. I said yeah, most nights, especially weekdays. He nodded like he already knew that. I kept working, placing the sandwich in the press, watching the timer. He walked over to the napkin holder and pulled out one, wiped his hands even though they didn't look dirty, then looked at the menu on the wall, like he needed to remember where he was. Something was off in the way he moved. Not clumsy, but like he was forcing normal actions. People don't stand that still unless they're thinking too hard. When the sandwich was done, I wrapped it up, put it on the counter, and told him the price. He dug into his jacket, slowly, pulling out a folded $5 and some change. I reached over, took the money, gave him the receipt. He didn't take the sandwich. He just stood there, staring at the glass behind me, the cooler with the drinks. I asked if he wanted a soda. He said no, still not looking at me. I turned to put the money in the register, and when I turned back, he was gone. Not out the door. He hadn't opened it. He was crouched low on the floor beside the counter, out of direct view from the front window. I froze, hand still on the drawer. My voice came out without thinking. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer, just raised a finger to his lips, then pointed outside. While I was still pressing the sandwich, he stepped up to the counter and leaned on it like he was about to say something. I glanced up, expecting another weird question, but instead, I felt his hand wrap around my wrist. It was sudden and strong. His grip locked in before I even understood what was happening. He pulled hard, trying to drag me across the counter toward him. The edge of the counter dug into my ribs as I lost my balance and tried to yank myself back. The pain shot up my arm, and for a few seconds, I couldn't make a sound. I wasn't even breathing, just staring at his knuckles clenched around my wrist like a vice. My first thought wasn't to scream. I just tried to twist out of his grip, but I couldn't. He was stronger, and he had leverage. I pushed with my free hand against the edge of the counter, trying to create space between us. He was saying something under his breath, but I didn't catch a word. Everything was noise. The door chime didn't ring, but suddenly there was movement from the back of the diner, a blur of motion from the corner where the lights didn't reach fully. A man rushed forward and tackled the guy from behind. I hadn't even noticed anyone was sitting there. Chairs scraped the floor as they went down. The two of them crashed onto the linoleum, struggling. The grip on my wrist broke, and I stumbled back against the coffee machine. I realized the man who had jumped in was one of the night guards from across the street. I'd seen him on smoke breaks, pacing by the fence. He wrestled the attacker off me, trying to pin him. The guy in the windbreaker thrashed hard, elbowing back with surprising force. He shoved the guard off, jumped to his feet, and without even looking back, ran straight for the door. It slammed against the frame as he vanished into the dark outside. The guard sprinted after him, but he wasn't fast enough. The attacker had already slipped into the alley that ran behind the building. I stood still, my legs unsteady, hand throbbing. My knees almost gave out when I thought how easily he could have gotten me over that counter. The guard came back a few minutes later, breathing hard, shaking his head. "He's gone," he said. "Slipped into the alley. Probably knows this area." He asked if I was all right. I nodded, still gripping the edge of the counter, even though my knuckles were white from it. He pulled out his phone, called the police, and said he'd stay until they came. I was glad he did. I didn't want to be alone in that place again, not even for a minute. The police arrived within 15 minutes. They took my statement, asked me to go over every second of what happened. One of the officers reviewed the footage from the diner's old camera system. The feed wasn't great, grainy and low angle, but you could clearly see the moment he grabbed me and the guard running in. Problem was, the attacker wore a cap low on his face. No real way to get a clean look at him. They took a copy of the footage anyway, and said they'd patrol the area more often for the next few nights. They didn't promise much, just said they'd file the report and keep an eye out. I called my boss right after the officers left, told him everything, from the first weird behavior to the attack and the guards saving me. I expected concern, maybe an apology, or at least a promise to add better locks or another staff member at night. Something. Instead, he sighed and said, "I can't afford more staff. If you don't feel safe, maybe this job's not for you." I didn't even know what to say. I needed the paycheck. Rent, tuition, groceries. They weren't going to cover themselves. But after what happened, I couldn't imagine standing behind that counter again, waiting for the next person to walk in through the glass door. I lasted one more shift. I stayed in daylight, covered a morning slot for someone who was out sick. After that, I handed in my notice. No drama. Just said I was done. A week later, one of my old co-workers texted me. She said the boss didn't even mention the attack in the staff group chat. Just told people to be extra cautious at night and put up a paper sign by the clock-in machine that read, "Stay alert. Avoid being distracted on shift." No mention of what actually happened. No changes to protocol. Nothing official. But I did hear they started putting 2 people on the graveyard shift. Quietly. No announcement, just more overlapping shifts. It was like they knew things had gone too far, but didn't want to admit it. I still pass by the place sometimes on my way home from class. The lights still hum, the same neon open 24 hours flickers in the window. I lost the job, yeah. But I kept thinking how much worse it could have been if the guard hadn't been there. If he'd taken a smoke break at the wrong time. If I hadn't asked that guy if he wanted coffee. If I hadn't made noise. Some nights I still wake up with my wrist aching even though there's nothing wrong with it anymore. In the dream, I can't break free. There's no guard in the corner. No one runs in. Just silence. Just the grip, and the counter, and the sound of the bell above the door that never rings. I never liked coming home late, but that night Laura and I stayed longer at a small party with mutual friends. It wasn't anything wild, just some wine and chatter. Around midnight, we finally decided to head back. The air outside was crisp, a bit colder than I expected. We both had jackets, though, and thought it'd be nice to get some fresh air, so we got off the bus 2 stops early. We figured the walk would help us sober up a little and talk more privately without the noise. The streets were mostly empty. A couple of taxis passed us, headlights sweeping across the wet pavement. It had rained earlier, and the sidewalks were still damp, glistening under the street lamps. We weren't in a bad area, just a quiet residential part of the city, the kind with old Soviet blocks, narrow alleys, and random patches of trees. We were talking about the party, who said what, who drank too much, when we both saw a man standing under a street lamp. He didn't move. His head was lowered like he was looking at the ground, and his arms were hanging by his sides. I thought maybe he was waiting for someone, or maybe trying to get a taxi. His posture didn't scream danger. He was wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. Nothing strange, but something about how still he was made me take a half step closer to Laura. She went quiet mid-sentence. Neither of us said anything. We kept walking, tried to act like we hadn't noticed him. As we got closer, I focused on not making eye contact. We passed him, maybe 2 meters away. Then he muttered something low, impossible to understand, and began walking behind us. Not fast, not slow either. Just enough to make it clear he was following. I looked at Laura quickly. She gave me a sharp glance, just a second, and then looked straight ahead. We didn't run or panic, just walked a little faster, casual, like we were late for something. But I could hear his steps behind us, matching ours. Then his steps got quicker. Laura leaned toward me and whispered, "He's speeding up." I nodded, didn't say anything. The road ahead curved into a darker stretch where one of the street lamps was flickering. I didn't want to go there. I remembered there was a side alley between 2 buildings, with a few entrances to apartments. Most had keypads. Some had those little porch lights always on. I pointed toward it without speaking, and we turned into the alley quickly. It was narrower than I remembered. There were garbage bins, and the smell of wet cardboard mixed with something rotten. The buildings on either side were 5 stories tall, standard panel housing with identical doors. I was already thinking of plans. If he followed us in here, we'd press ourselves against one of the doorways and hope someone heard if we screamed. Or maybe we could bang on a door. Maybe someone would be awake. It was late, but not that late. I looked behind us. He was there, not far, turning into the alley maybe 10 meters back. Still walking, still not running. But he wasn't hesitating either. We kept walking faster. Laura pulled out her phone. I could see her hands shaking. She kept missing the unlock screen. Her thumb fumbled with the code. I told her to calm down, but my voice didn't sound right. That's when I realized he wasn't just following us directly. I glanced back and saw him step into a yard, cutting through one of the side paths that ran behind the buildings. He was trying to intercept us from the other end. That's when I started to actually feel panic crawl up my spine. I grabbed Laura's arm and said, "We need to move." She nodded, finally unlocking her phone, but I knew calling wouldn't help unless we had a place to stop and wait for someone to arrive. The alley curved slightly ahead. If he was cutting through the yards, he could meet us at the other end. I didn't know how many exits there were. The walls were covered in graffiti, peeling posters, and old intercom panels with broken buttons. One of the doors had a keypad with a small light above it. I reached for the intercom and started pressing random numbers, hoping one would ring someone. Laura tried calling emergency, but her voice shook when she spoke to the dispatcher. I could hear her say something about being followed. She didn't wait for questions, just gave the address. The steps behind us disappeared for a few seconds, and I knew he was somewhere nearby, but not directly behind. I listened hard, but all I heard was Laura's breathing and the faint buzzing of the intercom. Then I saw movement to our left, through a gap between the buildings. A shadow shifted past a metal gate. He was fast. He was trying to get ahead again. That was when Laura dropped her phone. It landed screen first on the concrete. I picked it up and shoved it back into her hands. She didn't say anything. We didn't run. Not yet. Just walked even faster, turned a corner past the bins, and suddenly heard steps again. Close. Real close. We turned onto another street, hoping to lose him among the courtyards, but the area was darker than we thought. Barely any of the street lamps worked, and everything around us looked deserted. The buildings were old, with tall fences, and a few broken-down cars were parked along the sides. Windows above were mostly dark. It was the kind of place where no one would hear you, even if you screamed. That was when I realized he knew it too. I heard his steps speed up behind us, heavy and uneven. Then his voice cut through the silence, loud, rough, almost like he was barking orders. "Hey, stop!" It didn't sound like someone confused or lost. It sounded like someone angry. Laura let out a small sound, not quite a scream, more like a gasp, and grabbed my wrist. We bolted. Not a word between us, just ran the way we came, back toward the better-lit part of the block. I could hear his footsteps gaining, the sound of his boots hitting the pavement harder. We cut through a narrow passage between two buildings. My shoulder brushed a rusted pipe sticking out of a wall, but I didn't stop. At the end of the passage, I spotted a sign with red letters glowing faintly. A 24-hour mini-market. I pointed, and Laura followed. We sprinted across the last stretch of road and up the small steps, nearly slamming into the glass door. Inside, near the fridges, a security guard in a blue uniform was sitting on a stool, arms crossed. He looked up, confused, as we rushed in. "Can we close the door?" I asked, breathing hard. "Please. Someone's following us." He stood up slowly, looking past us toward the street. Through the glass, I saw the man in the hoodie. He stood right outside, staring in. His hands were tucked into his pockets, and he wasn't breathing hard at all. Like he hadn't even been running. He didn't knock, didn't try to come in. Just looked. Then something in his face changed. Maybe he saw the guard. Or maybe he realized we weren't alone anymore. He paused for a few seconds, then turned around and walked away. Not fast. Just disappeared into the dark again. The guard locked the door. We both stood there for a moment, hands on knees, trying to catch our breath. Laura was pale. Her phone buzzed once, maybe a missed call or a text, but she didn't check. "What's going on?" the guard finally asked. We could barely explain, just bits and pieces. "He followed us. Dark alley. Tried to cut us off." The guy nodded slowly and stepped outside for a minute, but came back shaking his head. "No one out there now." We called the police. Laura gave them our location and told them what had happened. They listened, asked if he touched us, if he said anything specific. I heard the answer and already knew what they were going to say. There wasn't much they could do unless a crime had actually happened. They promised to send a patrol car around the area, but didn't sound urgent. I didn't care. Just being inside, under bright lights, with shelves of snacks and drinks, and a bored cashier tapping her nails against the counter. It was enough to make things feel less dangerous. But we didn't relax. Laura kept glancing toward the windows. The cashier gave us some bottled water and said, "Next time, take a taxi all the way home. It's not worth walking." We nodded. Didn't argue. We waited there for maybe 20 more minutes, just to be safe. Eventually, we ordered a taxi to come directly to the mini-market entrance. The ride home was silent. Neither of us wanted to say anything. At home, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, running over every detail again and again. That man hadn't looked drunk. He hadn't looked confused. He was waiting under that lamp for something, or someone. And when he saw us, he decided it was going to be us. Laura texted me at 3 a.m. She said she kept thinking about the moment he turned toward the alley to cut us off. Said that was the part that made her feel real fear. That he wasn't just some weirdo wandering around. He was thinking about how to trap us. In the morning, we messaged our group chat with the friends from the party. Just a warning. If anyone's heading home around that area, don't walk. Get a taxi. We were followed. People responded with shock. A few said they'd seen weird guys near that part of town before, but no one knew anything for sure. I called the police station later to check if there were any updates. They hadn't caught anyone. No other reports had come in. Without any real identification or physical contact, they couldn't do much. What got to me the most was that he was still out there somewhere, walking around, looking for someone else. Maybe next time that person won't find a store, or a security guard, or even a working phone. I kept thinking, over and over, what if we hadn't seen him early enough? What if we hadn't turned? What if the mini-market had been closed? After that night, I never walked alone again. Not even a few blocks. Doesn't matter if it's the safest neighborhood or if I've walked it 100 times before. If it's dark, I wait for a taxi or call someone to meet me. That fear never fully goes away. It's not worth testing your luck. Not after you've already had it tested once. I started working for a pizza delivery place to earn some extra cash using my own car. It was a simple setup. Pick up the order, drive to the address, hand over the food, get paid. I liked the job. Even with the late-night runs, it gave me a bit of freedom, and the pay was decent. That evening, I was assigned a delivery in one of the older neighborhoods, the kind with huge houses that probably looked impressive 30 years ago, but now had overgrown lawns and broken porch lights. Some of them were totally empty, windows boarded up or just dark inside. It wasn't the kind of place I usually delivered to, but I figured it was still just another job. The address on the slip led me to a big 2-story house with cracked siding and a sagging fence. The porch light was dead, and there was no car in the driveway. I pulled up to the curb, engine running, and stepped out with the pizza box in my hands. I went up the steps and pressed the doorbell, but nothing happened. No buzz, no sound inside. I knocked hard on the wooden door, and after about a minute, someone finally opened it. He looked around 20, maybe a little older, wearing a plain t-shirt and shorts like he'd just been lounging around. He gave me a lazy smile and said his friend would get the money. "Just a sec, bro," he said, turning back inside. I stood there holding the box, glancing around. The street was dead quiet. No other cars, no lights in the windows nearby. It didn't feel right, but I couldn't say exactly why. I shifted from one foot to the other, waiting. The guy didn't close the door all the way, just let it hang half open while he walked off. I could see the narrow hallway behind him, dimly lit, and the edge of a staircase going up. Still, nothing too weird. Some people just took forever to come back with cash. Then 2 more guys came from deeper inside the house. They weren't dressed like the first guy. One wore a hoodie with the hood pulled up even though it wasn't cold, and the other had a jacket with one arm stuffed deep into the sleeve, like he was hiding something. I stepped back slightly, trying not to show I was nervous. The guy in the hoodie walked straight toward me, not saying anything at first. The one with the jacket kept his eyes low, but his body was angled in a way that made my stomach drop. They stepped onto the porch, boxing me in. The guy in the hoodie spoke first, voice low and direct. Give me your keys, phone too, and the money. Now. I froze. For maybe half a second, I thought about running, but I couldn't even move. My legs felt locked. The guy with the jacket angled his arms slightly, and I saw the shape under the fabric. It was definitely a gun. I didn't argue. I reached into my pocket and handed over my keys, then the phone. I pulled the small pouch with the knight's tips from my jacket and gave that up too. They didn't say anything else. The guy in the t-shirt who first opened the door just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, grinning like this was all a joke to him, like he'd seen it all before. I realized then it had all been a setup. I was the only idiot who didn't know what was coming. New driver, unfamiliar area, late night delivery. I was an easy target. The guy with the gun took the stuff and quickly stepped back inside. The other one, the one who spoke, jumped down from the porch and took off running across the overgrown lawn next door. He kept looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to chase him. I realized then that the place had probably been abandoned for a long time. There were no lights inside, and through the half-open door, I didn't see any furniture, just bare walls and dust. It wasn't someone's home, not anymore. The guy who opened the door had clearly just used it as a setup location. I stood on the porch for a few seconds, trying to figure out what to do. My car was gone. My phone too. I had no way to call anyone. I went back down the steps and looked around the street. Most of the houses were dark. It was hard to tell which ones were occupied. I walked quickly across the street to a house with a small porch light still on. I knocked. At first, nothing. Then I knocked again, louder. A few moments later, a woman in her 50s opened the door. She had a phone in her hand already, probably wondering who the hell was banging on her door that late. I told her what happened, just the basics. She didn't ask many questions, just handed me the phone and let me call the police. The patrol car showed up faster than I expected. 2 officers got out and took my statement. I walked them over to the old house, pointing out where it all happened. Of course, there was no one left. The door was wide open, but the house was empty. Inside, you could see the walls stripped down, no signs of life at all. Just footprints in the dust and a couple empty beer bottles on the floor. My car was gone, just like I thought. They probably had someone waiting nearby, maybe drove it off as soon as I was distracted. The cops told me this kind of thing wasn't rare. Delivery drivers were easy marks, especially when they worked solo at night. They said some gangs used fake orders to lure people into quiet areas like this. It wasn't personal, just a method. That didn't make it any easier to hear. They said they'd file the report and log the theft, but honestly, they didn't sound too hopeful. I tried asking about any cameras nearby, but they already knew the answer before I finished the question. Most of these old houses were either vacant or rented out short-term. The ones that had people living in them didn't bother with security systems. We walked a bit through the area, checking for signs of cameras on poles or above garages, but found nothing. One house had a broken camera mount hanging above the door, wires cut. The officer shrugged and told me they'd keep the case open, but finding those guys wouldn't be easy without footage or plates on the car. I left the station a couple hours later with a copy of the report. That was it. No leads, no suspects. Just my statement and the list of items stolen. I contacted my insurance about the stolen vehicle the next morning, and they said they'd need a few weeks to investigate. Meanwhile, I was out of a car and stuck waiting. The pizza shop owner gave me a pat on the back and said he was sorry. Said it wasn't the first time this had happened. He told me he'd tried talking to the higher-ups about better safety for drivers, tracking units, maybe sending someone to tag along after dark, but they didn't want to pay for it. I told them, he said, but no one listens until something worse happens. That was it. A sympathetic tone and nothing else. I couldn't even blame him. He was just another guy stuck in the middle. But it was clear the company didn't care much. I was disposable. Another name on a rotating schedule. If I quit, they'd have someone new by the weekend. I felt like an idiot for being so naive. It was obvious now that I'd walked right into something that had probably happened before. I was just next on the list. That feeling stayed with me for the rest of the week. Every time my phone buzzed or someone knocked on a door in a movie, I'd tense up. I couldn't sleep right. I kept replaying the moment when the second guy stepped out of the hallway with his hand in his jacket. I didn't even know if the gun was real, but I wasn't about to test it. A week later, I quit the delivery job. I found a temporary gig doing inventory for a warehouse on the edge of town. It wasn't exciting, but it felt safer. At least I was indoors. My car never turned up. The insurance company eventually agreed to a payout, but it didn't cover everything. I was still in the hole for the balance on the loan, plus the tips and phone I lost. What stuck with me more than the money was that moment of being surrounded in silence, knowing no one was coming. The porch, the shadows, the way the guy smirked as if it were just a game. That image burned itself into my head. I don't take late-night jobs anymore. I avoid certain neighborhoods altogether, even during the day. I check doors twice, glance over my shoulder constantly. I know it's irrational, but it's automatic now. Fear like that doesn't go away quickly. My new boss said the work environment would be calmer, and I clung to that hope like it was a lifeline. Still, every time I sit behind the wheel, I get a tight feeling in my chest. It doesn't matter how bright the day is. I remember how they looked at me, like I didn't matter at all, like I was just part of a plan. Sometimes I dream that I'm back on that porch, holding a pizza box, waiting for the door to open. And behind it, they're still there, waiting. I used to think delivery was just a simple job. Now I know better. Sometimes a simple delivery can turn into a real nightmare. I had an argument with my mom. Nothing too big, but the kind where neither of us wanted to back down. I don't even remember what started it now. Something about my job search or how late I'd been getting up lately. I snapped and told her I needed space, stormed out of the apartment without thinking. No phone, no wallet, just my hoodie and slippers. It was past midnight, and all I wanted was to walk it off. The air outside felt sharp and cold. The street was quiet, the kind of silence that makes every little sound louder. My first steps felt freeing, like I was proving something, like I could handle myself. I walked down the familiar blocks, heading nowhere in particular. The lights from the windows had mostly gone dark, just a few flickers of TVs still on. Streetlights were scattered, leaving chunks of the sidewalk in deep shadow. I walked faster whenever I hit those patches of dark. A couple people passed me. An older man with a plastic bag, some girl walking her dog. Nobody said anything, but I kept my eyes low and stayed to the side. I started thinking about how dumb it was to leave without my phone. I hadn't even taken keys. If I went back now, I'd have to ring the buzzer, and that would mean dealing with the tension again. At a four-way intersection near the edge of the neighborhood, I slowed down. There were those metal newspaper stands on the corner, and as I passed them, I caught a glimpse of movement. A man was standing half-hidden behind them. I don't know how I didn't notice him earlier. He wasn't doing anything, just sort of watching. He was wearing a baseball cap and a dark hoodie, and when our eyes met for a second, I saw that he wasn't just standing there randomly. He was looking at me. I kept walking. My pace didn't change, but I started counting my steps to keep myself from looking back. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. I told myself not to overthink it. But something about how still he was, how quiet, made my stomach tighten. I turned down the next block without stopping, and as soon as I was around the corner, I picked up the pace. It got darker on the street. Fewer houses, more overgrown hedges, and the trees hung low over the sidewalk. I glanced behind me. For a few seconds, nothing. Then I saw him again, maybe half a block back. He wasn't rushing, just walking. Same hoodie, same cap. He didn't look like he was in a hurry, but he also wasn't turning off anywhere. I crossed the street. My plan was to loop around to the main road, somewhere with more lights and maybe a store open late. Ahead on the corner was a small kids' center. Low building, murals of cartoon animals on the wall, locked up for the night. That's when I noticed the headlights. A white SUV was parked weird, not close to the curb, angled like someone had pulled up fast and left it. I didn't think anything of it at first, until the engine turned on. The lights flared up, and the SUV rolled forward slowly, not fast, not like someone leaving, just slow, following. I kept walking. I looked straight ahead, pretending I hadn't seen anything, but I was tracking every sound. Tires crunching lightly over gravel. The hum of the engine behind me. My mind was racing. 2 people. One walking, one driving. I had no phone, no cash, no one nearby. If they tried something, I had no plan. I crossed again, cutting diagonally through a small patch of grass, trying to get behind the kids' center where there might be a fence or a back lot. The SUV kept its distance, turning just enough to stay with me. I couldn't see the driver clearly. The lights were too bright, but they weren't honking or trying to pass, just pacing me. My legs were shaking. Not from fear exactly, but from how hard I was forcing them to keep moving, to not break into a sprint. I knew if I started running, that would trigger something. I needed to stay unnoticed. I stopped for a second, pretended to fix my shoe, glanced back. He was still there. The man from before, still walking, now only a few houses away. I straightened and kept walking. I passed a side alley, looked down it. It was empty, but pitch black. Not an option. I couldn't tell if they were working together or if it was just 2 separate threats at once. I made it to the back gate of the center and tested it. Locked. I turned quickly and started back toward the sidewalk. As I stepped out from the side of the building, the SUV turned its wheel slightly and crept forward again. I turned into the courtyard between the buildings, hoping to hide and wait it out until the car left. The space was narrow, with a low fence running along one side and a concrete path leading to some garage doors. I pressed myself against the wall near the corner, behind a rusted dumpster, trying not to breathe too loud. The SUV passed by slowly, headlights sweeping across the yard. For a second, the light caught the area near me, and I stayed completely still. I don't think they saw me. The sound of brakes creaked softly, like the driver stopped again. Then the hum of the engine picked up, only to stop and start again. They weren't driving anywhere specific. They were searching. Looking for someone, maybe anyone walking alone this late. I crouched lower, listening. The engine noise drifted in and out, moving just enough to tell me they hadn't left the area. Then I heard it. Footsteps, somewhere on the sidewalk behind the garages. Not rushing. Steady. Too steady. For a moment, I thought the man I saw earlier would come out, drawn by the sound of the motor. The idea of both of them in the same place made something cold settle into my chest. I couldn't stay here long. I scanned the courtyard for a second way out, but it was all locked gates and closed-off fences. I needed to move before they doubled back or turned into the driveway. Every second I waited, it felt like they were closing in. When the headlights faded further down the road, I risked a peek over the fence. The SUV had rolled forward a bit but still sat parked on the curb, hazard lights blinking quietly. That constant flashing orange glow made everything feel more dangerous, like they weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. Maybe they were waiting for me to panic and make a move. I thought about just staying hidden until morning, but the thought of the man being close by, maybe even inside the same yard, pushed that idea out fast. I moved quickly. There was a row of narrow garden walkways behind the garages, the kind people used to get to their back doors. I ducked through one of them, slipping between hedges and hopping a short fence into the next yard. I paused to listen. No steps, no engine. Then moved on. My shoes crunched a little on gravel, and every sound felt too loud, like it echoed off the walls. I kept low, sticking close to shadows. 1 yard after another, I pushed forward, cutting behind buildings, past trash bins and drying laundry. At one point, a dog barked from inside a house and lights clicked on in an upstairs window. I froze. Nothing happened. The light stayed on, but no one looked out. I crossed that yard fast. Then I saw it. A strip of sidewalk lit by brighter lamps, the corner of a more active street just beyond the last fence. My legs hurt. My back was tense from crouching, but I didn't stop. I reached the lit sidewalk, pausing just long enough to check both directions. No car. No man. I walked fast, then faster, and then broke into a jog. A minute later, I was back in more familiar territory. Busier streets, a small convenience store still glowing across the avenue, a few late-night cars rolling by. I didn't stop moving. 2 more blocks, and I was near a friend's building. I hadn't even planned where I was going until I saw her kitchen light on from the street. Her apartment was on the first floor, window cracked open, the soft clatter of dishes coming from inside. I knocked on the door hard, looked around while I waited, and knocked again. She answered in a robe, confused but not alarmed, at least not until she saw my face. I didn't waste time. I just said, "Can I stay here tonight? I think someone was following me." She didn't ask much. Let me in, closed the blinds, and locked the door twice. I sat at her kitchen table, shaking slightly now that it was over. She gave me water, said I could take the couch, and I didn't argue. Next morning, just after sunrise, I walked home with her. We didn't see the SUV. No sign of the man either. I rang the buzzer, and my mom answered right away. She opened the door looking pale and tired. I told her everything. About the walk, the car, the man, all of it. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she didn't even mention the argument. She just said, "I'm so glad you're okay." We both knew how different the ending could have been. I should have never gone out like that. No phone, no way to call for help. And I definitely shouldn't have walked into those dark side streets. I think about it often. What if they had cornered me in one of those courtyards? What if the man had come around just a minute earlier? Since that night, I never go anywhere late without my phone. I don't storm out like that, no matter how angry or upset I get. And I stay close to lights, to crowds, to cameras. I don't care how safe a place feels. Once you see how fast it can turn, you don't take chances anymore. When I moved into this modest house on the edge of town, everything seemed perfect. The street was quiet, barely any traffic, a few neighbors who mostly kept to themselves, and a small yard out back with just enough space for a chair and a coffee table. The first week felt like a fresh start. I spent the days unpacking, hanging curtains, rearranging furniture. I'd leave the windows open to let the breeze in while I sorted through boxes, and I started sleeping better than I had in months. Around the 4th day, I noticed something strange. Across the street, in the house directly facing mine, there was a man always by the window. Not once in passing, not for a quick look. He just stood there. Morning, afternoon, even late in the evening. At first, I thought he might be elderly, maybe bored, maybe just used to watching the world go by from that exact spot. I tried to ignore it, but every time I looked out, he was there, always at the same window, always facing mine. A few days later, I caught a glint of something in his hands. I squinted. It was a pair of binoculars. He wasn't just staring vaguely in my direction. He was watching my window specifically. Once, I could have sworn he was holding a camera with a long lens, but I looked away quickly and didn't check again. I told myself it could still be innocent. Maybe bird watching. Maybe he was watching traffic. Maybe anything except what I thought. I changed the angle of my couch so I wouldn't be facing that window directly. Still, I couldn't help but glance over every now and then. And there he was. Same spot. Same stare. Soon after, I noticed a new pattern. Whenever I left the house to go to the store, he'd step out onto his porch. He wouldn't do anything obvious, just stand there, pretending to check his mailbox or sweep a step. But it always happened as I was locking my door. At first, I didn't connect it. Then I tested it. I opened my front door, paused, closed it again. Less than a minute later, I peeked through the curtain, and there he was on his porch. Another time, I returned from shopping with 2 bags in my hands. As I walked up the steps, I looked up, and there he was, at the window, watching me. I didn't see him blink. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, trying to decide if I should wave or do something else. I ended up just going inside quickly and locking the door behind me. A few days later, it escalated. I was at the supermarket, walking through the produce aisle. I turned the corner with my cart, and there he was, not even trying to look casual. Just standing there, looking into my cart like he was trying to remember the brands or items. No smile, no greeting, nothing. He didn't approach, just stared. I pushed past him, heart racing, finished shopping in a rush, and left without looking back. At home, I tried reasoning with myself. It could be a coincidence. Maybe he shops at the same store. Maybe his schedule just overlaps with mine. I told myself it wasn't worth panicking over. But the next day I bought thicker curtains. Not just for the living room, but for the bedroom too. I needed to shut him out completely. That night, around 11 p.m., I was in bed scrolling on my phone when I saw it. Bright, sharp flashes lighting up my curtains. They weren't long like lightning, more like short bursts, 2 or 3 at a time. I sat up and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out without being seen. Someone was taking photos of my house. I couldn't see who it was. The street was dark and empty except for the occasional flicker from across the road. But I knew. It had to be him. That was it. I wasn't going to let this slide anymore. I got dressed, grabbed a jacket, and went straight for the door. I was going to talk to him, face to face, and figure out what the hell was going on. The next day, I waited for a chance to cross paths with him. Late morning, I took out the trash, lingering by the bin longer than I needed to. Sure enough, he was at his usual spot by the window. I looked up, raised a hand, and said, "Morning." He didn't respond. Just stared at me, his face blank, eyes locked like he was trying to decide something. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away from the window. That evening, I found a note slipped under my door. No envelope, no name. Just one line written in block letters. "You're in someone else's place, and this won't end easily." I stood there holding it for a long time. It didn't make sense. But it hit me. I remembered a comment the realtor made when I was buying the house. Something vague about the previous tenant leaving unexpectedly. I hadn't thought much of it. But now, holding that note, I wondered if it was more than just a sudden move. I tried not to panic. Instead, I called the agent who sold me the house. He didn't know much, or claimed not to. Said the last occupant didn't leave a forwarding address and stopped responding to emails. She just vanished, he said, like it was nothing unusual. I didn't say anything about the neighbor or the note. I needed more before anyone would take this seriously. That night, around 2 a.m., I heard something on the porch. A metallic sound, brief but deliberate. I stayed still, listening, but it didn't come again. In the morning, I opened the door and found something pinned to the frame with a thumbtack. A fake set of keys, clearly plastic, with a tag that read, "Home." No other message. Just that. I stood there in my robe, staring at them, the cold creeping in past the doorway. This was more than watching now. It was a message. He thought this place belonged to him. I called the police that afternoon. I didn't want to wait until something worse happened. I explained everything. How the man across the street had been watching me. How he followed me to the store. How he left threatening notes and now fake keys. I showed them the note, a few blurry photos from my phone showing him pointing a camera at my house, and told them about the flashes at night. A patrol car showed up an hour later. The officer was polite, middle-aged, with a tired face like he'd seen it all before. He listened, took a few notes, asked to see the neighbor's house from my window. Then he crossed the street to speak to him. I watched from inside as the officer knocked. The man answered slowly, leaning on a cane, moving like it hurt to stand. I couldn't hear what he said, but his body language was calm, even friendly. A few nods, a small shrug. Then he pointed toward his leg and shook his head. After 10 minutes, the officer returned and told me the man denied everything. Claimed he rarely left the house, said he was recovering from a fall and could barely walk. According to him, I must have misinterpreted things. He's convincing, the officer said. But if you really think something's off, you need solid proof. Install a camera, record anything suspicious. So I did. I bought a small camera and mounted it just above the front door. I made sure it covered the porch and the driveway. I double-checked every window and made sure the locks were solid. That helped a little, but not enough. I still avoided the front room and kept the curtains shut. I stopped going out at the same time every day, started ordering groceries instead of leaving the house. But I could still feel him watching. A week passed. I didn't see him much. No flashes, no notes, no movement. I began to think maybe the camera scared him off. Then one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in a blue cap, tool belt around his waist, holding a small toolbox. He smiled and said through the door, "Ma'am, you called about a leak?" I hadn't. I didn't open the door. "Which company are you from?" I asked. No answer. I watched him shift his weight, look down the street, then back at the door. Something about his posture felt familiar. His face was different. He had a bit of stubble, his jacket looked too clean. But the build, the way he stood with one shoulder slightly raised, that was him. I was sure. I backed away from the door and called the police immediately. I kept my voice low and told them I was being impersonated by someone who had already been reported for harassment. While I waited, I watched through the window. He stayed there, occasionally looking around, pretending to inspect the steps. I saw him try the doorknob once. Just a small tug, quick, like he was testing it. When the police arrived, he didn't run. He greeted them like nothing was wrong. Told them he was just trying to help after hearing a pipe burst from another neighbor. I stepped out and told them everything I knew, pointing out that this was the same man from across the street. The officers checked the door and found tool marks around the lock. Not a full break-in, but signs of tampering. That was enough to take him in. As they walked him to the car, he turned his head toward me and said quietly, "It's not your house. You'll see. You'll pay." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just obsession. In his mind, he believed it. This place was his. I wasn't just a stranger. I was someone who had stolen something from him. The police said they'd investigate further. They kept him overnight and assured me they'd place a temporary watch on the street. But the officer who took the report also told me, "He'll probably be back. These types don't always stay down." It's been quiet since, but every creak, every rustle outside, makes me look toward that house across the street. The curtains are closed now, but one day they'll shift again, and I'll be watching. I worked at a mid-level office job where things moved at a steady pace. The team was competitive but got along well enough to avoid any serious drama. Then management brought in an intern, clearly someone's relative or connection. I figured it'd be a temporary thing, just another kid passing through. He showed up looking quiet, kept to himself mostly, didn't talk much unless spoken to. But his eyes were sharp, always scanning the room, like he was paying more attention than he let on. I was told to help him get started. Basic stuff, just showing him how to use the internal systems, assigning him minor tasks, things like that. He always said thanks, always polite, never pushed back on anything. But he started asking weird questions, not about the work, but about people. Like who worked on which projects, who stayed late, who took time off a lot. I brushed it off at first. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he was trying to learn the ropes. After the second week, I noticed he came into my office when I wasn't there. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but I kept catching little signs. My chair would be adjusted differently. Sometimes papers would be out of order. Once I found a folder from the locked drawer sitting open on the desk. I asked him about it directly. He just smiled and nodded like he didn't hear me properly. I told him not to touch anything that wasn't his. He apologized, but I wasn't sure he meant it. He kept hanging around places he didn't need to be. Copy room, back hallway near the server closet, the corner desks where the managers sat. Always with that same quiet, calm face. A couple times I walked in and saw him quickly close a file or minimize a window. I didn't say anything. It felt like overreacting, and I didn't want to seem like I was picking on him. But I started watching more closely. He wasn't using the guest login. He'd somehow gotten into user accounts he wasn't assigned to. When I asked him about it, he said the manager gave him access. I checked. No one had. He always had some excuse. I was told to check this report. I needed to test something. But he never had emails or messages backing that up. When I mentioned this to my manager, they said they'd talk to him. But nothing changed. Then stuff started disappearing. Nothing huge at first, just little things. A flash drive someone left on their desk. A file folder that was supposed to be in a locked cabinet. A signed contract copy that had been there one day and gone the next. People thought they were just being forgetful. He was always the first to help look for it. He'd walk around asking questions, opening drawers like he had permission. And somehow he always ended up near the place where the missing item would turn up again. Or wouldn't. I started keeping track. He was always nearby when something vanished. Sometimes the item showed up again in a different drawer or under someone's desk. Once, a spreadsheet was completely altered, and no one could figure out why. We restored it from backup, but no one had a log of who changed it. Only a handful of people had access to that file. He wasn't one of them, officially. I saw him near that computer earlier in the day. I brought it up at the team meeting, without naming him. Just mentioned the altered files and how we needed tighter access control. People nodded, said they'd be more careful. No one suspected him. He kept the same quiet, polite face. Never showed any emotion, just kept typing, clicking through screens. I tried confronting him again, this time directly. Asked him why he was logged into a workstation that wasn't his. He didn't even blink. Said he was on a special task from higher up. Told me I could check with management. I did. They had no idea what he was talking about. One morning I came in early and found him at my desk. My computer was on, and he was copying something to a USB drive. He froze when he saw me, then calmly pulled the drive out and said, "Sorry, I thought you wouldn't be in yet." I asked what he was doing. He said it was for a report and walked out like nothing happened. I checked the activity log. Half my project files had been accessed, and a couple folders were missing entirely. I restored them, but it left a bad taste. I reported it, finally named him in the complaint. HR said they'd look into it. Nothing happened. He kept showing up, sitting at different computers, claiming to be helping out. He said he was doing a rotation across departments. No one could confirm that, but also, no one wanted to escalate it. It wasn't serious enough, nothing provable. Just small things that piled up over time. Colleagues started whispering that someone was sabotaging their work. Files would be moved, comments deleted, notes missing. A presentation was overwritten with an older version the night before a big meeting. I checked the logs. He'd logged into that computer late in the evening. Again, no one could prove anything. No cameras near that desk, just system logs that could mean anything. I installed a private file tracker on my main folder. Nothing illegal, just version control. I wanted to know if anything changed without my knowledge. 2 days later, a document had been opened, altered, and saved under a new name, then deleted. I recovered the file and compared the timestamps. He had been alone in the office at the time. He told the admin he was waiting for a call from a client. I started locking my drawers. Kept backups of everything. Tried not to leave anything unattended. He noticed. Asked me if I didn't trust him. I said I locked everything, not just because of him. He smiled and said, "That's smart." He stopped coming to my desk after that. But he didn't stop showing up around other people's workstations. One day, a report I'd been working on for weeks went missing. Not just any report. This was a critical file meant for upper management, the kind that could decide whether you get your bonus or a formal warning. I checked every folder, every drawer, every shared drive. I even went through the trash, thinking maybe I'd deleted it by mistake. Nothing. The deadline was closing in, and I was sweating, trying to come up with how to explain this. Then he showed up. He walked into my office holding the missing folder like it was no big deal. Said he'd found it in the hallway, just laying there on a bench. He smiled, that same fake smile he always used, and handed it to me like he was doing me a huge favor. I didn't believe him. I'd checked everywhere, including that hallway, more than once. I took the folder and didn't say much, just nodded. But inside, I knew. He'd hidden it. Waited until I was desperate, then rescued me to look good in front of everyone. I wasn't the only one watching. A few coworkers glanced between us, sensing something wasn't right. They saw how tense I was, how tightly I held the folder, like I was afraid he'd snatch it back. But no one said anything. He had them confused, unsure if he was a helpful guy or a snake. That week, more little things happened. Someone's client call got mysteriously dropped mid-pitch. A backup file was overwritten with an older, unusable version. A folder with financials disappeared and reappeared with slight edits that no one could trace. Always subtle, always small, but enough to throw people off. I went to my department head. I laid it out calmly. What I'd noticed, what I suspected. I didn't accuse directly, just presented what I'd seen. He barely looked up from his screen. "We're short-staffed," he said. "We don't have time for drama. Just keep things moving." That was it. No follow-up, no questions. Just a shrug and a dismissal. I realized then that this intern, whoever he really was getting away with it because no one wanted to deal with the mess. Every small sabotage, every quiet manipulation was building something, and no one cared to stop it. He got bolder after that, walked around like he belonged there, gave suggestions in meetings even though no one had asked him to, sat at desks that weren't his, talked to people like he was already their superior, and people listened. They didn't trust him, but they didn't want to challenge him either. Then a project disappeared. An entire set of files vanished from our shared drive overnight. It wasn't just deleted, it was replaced with a mock version full of incorrect data. Deadlines were missed. Meetings were rescheduled. My manager called me in first thing the next morning, angry and demanding answers. Said I was supposed to oversee the project, so how had it fallen apart? I told him the truth, that the files were tampered with, that someone had changed access permissions without authorization. He narrowed his eyes but didn't say much. Just told me to find out who screwed up. I already knew. That afternoon, I found him sitting alone in the server room, typing something into the admin console like he owned it. I confronted him, kept my voice steady, asked what he was doing and how he got access. He didn't even pretend to be surprised, just leaned back and smiled. "My dad owns this place," he said. "Didn't you know?" I didn't respond. I just stood there, trying to figure out if he was serious or bluffing. "I'm here to see who's really loyal," he went on. "You'd be surprised how fast people turn when you poke around a little." Then he said something I still think about. If someone's too curious, if they don't fit in with the future of the company, maybe they're not the right person to keep around. He walked out past me like nothing had happened, like I didn't matter. A week later, I got called into HR. The tone was cold, professional. They said there had been concerns about my performance, that my recent handling of several key documents had been inconsistent, that my team didn't feel confident in my leadership. I sat there, listening to the words without really hearing them. It was already decided. I was let go that afternoon. Official reason: failure to meet expectations. My desk was cleared by security. No time to argue, no time to appeal. Just like that, I was out. No one stepped in. No one backed me up. A few coworkers avoided eye contact. Some looked sorry, but no one said anything. I couldn't blame them. They all had bills to pay. They'd seen what happened to me. Later, I heard whispers that 2 other employees had also been pushed out, quietly, one after the other. Same pattern. Files gone. Blame passed around. Intern always nearby, always offering help. That's when it really hit me. He wasn't just messing around. This had been a plan. The quiet, awkward kid wasn't clueless. He was calculating. Every move, every question, every accident had been a step in some kind of game, and he had the backing to get away with it. His last name was a shield. No matter what he did, someone at the top was going to clean up after him. I walked away. I didn't try to fight it. What was the point? It was a family business, and I wasn't family. Now I work somewhere else. A smaller company, less pay, but at least I can sleep at night. Still, I think about it more often than I'd like. How easy it was for someone like him to ruin careers. How no one wanted to see it, because it was inconvenient. People think danger shows up loud and obvious. But sometimes it wears a pressed shirt, carries a polite tone, and smiles while it cuts your legs out from under you. When my wife and I moved into this apartment, we were drawn in by the cheap rent and the fact that everything had been recently renovated. It seemed perfect at first glance. Bright rooms, quiet neighbors, and a calm, residential area. The kind of place that looked like it wouldn't give you any trouble. The first night, I noticed some faint rustling through the walls, but figured it was just the plumbing, or maybe the ventilation kicking in. The building was old underneath the new paint, so I didn't think much of it. My wife woke me up around 3 a.m. that night and said she heard someone cough. Not loud, more like a soft, dry cough right behind the bedroom wall. She said it sounded too close. I joked that maybe the neighbors weren't feeling well, or one of them snored weird. She didn't laugh. We tried to go back to sleep. The next night it happened again, only this time, it was followed by a faint shuffle, like someone adjusting their weight while standing. We both heard it. Not loud enough to be alarming, but clear enough to make you pause and listen. It became a pattern. Always late, always just before midnight or a little after. Coughing, shifting sounds, sometimes what felt like a slow, dragging noise. But it was never loud enough to be sure of what we were hearing. We turned off the TV earlier and started listening for it every night. Sometimes it happened, sometimes it didn't. But the quiet in between started to feel more unsettling than the sounds themselves. After a couple of weeks, the sounds weren't just at night anymore. I started hearing small taps during the day, like knuckles brushing against the wall near the bathroom. Just little things, nothing crazy, but always in that same general spot, between the bedroom and the hallway. My wife said it felt like someone was standing right behind the wall. It started getting to her. She kept turning off the radio just to listen, kept checking the window to see if maybe it was something from outside. But we're on the 3rd floor. There's no fire escape, no tree branches nearby, nothing that could tap the wall from the outside. We talked about it over dinner a few times and eventually decided to ask the building's handyman to come check the plumbing and ventilation. He came the next morning, older guy, been working there for years. Said he hadn't heard complaints like that before. He went through the whole apartment, kitchen sink, bathroom pipes, even the vent grids. Said everything was fine. Told us maybe the sounds were coming through the walls from the next unit and bouncing weird because of the layout. I didn't fully buy it, but I nodded along. My wife didn't say much while he was there, but I could tell she wasn't convinced either. That night, she woke me again around 2. She said this time it wasn't just coughing. She heard someone whispering. Not clear words, more like someone murmuring to themselves. Low, steady. She leaned close to the wall and said she could almost feel a vibration. That got me more on edge. I'm not into supernatural stuff, never have been, so I tried to come up with something solid. Maybe someone in the next apartment talks in their sleep, or maybe there's an open vent behind the wall and we're just catching strange echoes. But then she pointed something out that I hadn't noticed before. In the corner of our bedroom wall, just a few inches above the baseboard, there was a slight bulge in the wallpaper. You wouldn't really see it unless you were looking for it. It looked like someone had patched something up and then smoothed it over too quickly. The wallpaper was the same pattern, but the texture was off, a little softer there, like there wasn't solid plaster behind it. She wanted me to pull it back and check. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeled back a small corner carefully, trying not to tear too much. Underneath was a thin piece of plywood, maybe half an inch thick, wedged into a cutout section of the drywall. It wasn't nailed down, just pressed in. I took the edge of a spoon from the kitchen and gently worked it out. The wood was light, easy to lift. Behind it, There was a narrow cavity, maybe a foot deep, stretching vertically. I couldn't see much inside. No wires, no insulation, just a dark, damp space that smelled a little like old books or mildew. I stared at it for a bit. There wasn't anything visibly dangerous in there. No pests or wires hanging loose. But something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to be found. My wife stood behind me, not saying anything. I put the plywood back in and smoothed the wallpaper down as best I could. Told her we'd deal with it later, maybe ask the landlord. But she was more insistent. Said we needed to know what was behind there. Really know. Just to be safe. She said she had a bad feeling about it and didn't want to sleep until we were sure. Later that night, just as we were getting ready to sleep, I heard a whisper. Clear, deliberate, not muffled like before. It came directly from the wall, not behind it, right through it, like someone was only inches away. I immediately sat up and switched on the lamp. My wife was already upright, eyes wide. We both listened. Nothing for a few seconds. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "I heard footsteps." She pointed toward the same wall, like someone was touching it, walking along it. My pulse spiked. I got up and walked to the corner near the plywood panel. That's when we heard it. 3 soft knocks. Not random, not creaks or settling wood, just knock, 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 light and steady, right against the panel. I stood frozen. Someone on the other side knew we were here. They weren't just making noise anymore. They were trying to talk, or signal, or scare us. My wife whispered, "Call the police." I didn't argue. I dialed and told them exactly what was happening. I said there might be someone illegally accessing our apartment through a hidden crawl space or wall. I didn't bother hiding the fear in my voice. They told us to stay put, not to interact with anyone, and officers would arrive within minutes. We turned off all the lights and sat on the bed in the dark, waiting. We didn't speak. We didn't move. Just listened to the silence, broken only once more by another soft tap from the same spot. It took about 20 minutes for the police to arrive. They knocked and identified themselves. I opened the door quickly, explained everything again, and showed them the plywood panel. One of the officers examined it with a flashlight, gently pried it open with a tool from his belt, and then called his partner over. They both looked inside. Then one of them turned to us and said, "You're not going to like this." Inside the wall, there was a narrow passage, about a foot wide but stretching several feet deep and tall. Not something built into the original design. It had been hollowed out, roughly and deliberately. Behind it, there was another false panel, this time made from a thin piece of drywall, partially crumbled around the edges. The officer tapped it. It was flimsy. Behind that, another apartment's wall. Same building, neighboring unit. But this cavity had been carved into the divider between our units, allowing someone to listen, maybe even watch. They radioed for backup and went next door to the apartment beside ours. They knocked several times before a man finally opened. He looked disheveled, middle-aged, shirt hanging off one shoulder, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. The officers asked him if he knew anything about the wall cavity. He blinked slowly, like he was processing the question, then muttered something about hearing voices. When they asked him to clarify, he said something about his son. That his son used to live in our unit. That he died in an accident years ago. He said he was trying to find the memory, and that sometimes he thought he could still hear him. He kept talking, more erratic each minute, saying he believed if he listened closely enough, the sounds would help him bring it back. We stood in the hallway, barely able to move. I felt my wife clutch my arm tighter with every word. The man finally admitted he'd made the hole himself, that he'd been watching and listening because the voices needed to know who was in there. He said we weren't supposed to be there, that we didn't belong, that we were taking something that was his. The police gently pulled him aside, told him he needed to come with them. He didn't resist, but he kept crying. Not loud, just quietly repeating the same things. You stole it. You stole where I was happy. The officers said they'd bring him in for evaluation, that this wasn't the first time someone had a mental breakdown like this in an old property. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to feel pity, and I did, in a way. But more than anything, I wanted him gone. The next day, we hired a contractor, told them to seal up everything, fill the hole, reinforce the entire wall section, even repaint it so no trace of that cavity remained. They did a good job, fast and solid. You couldn't tell anything had been there, but we knew. Every time I walked past that corner, I remembered the soft knocking, the whisper, the tap like a finger brushing against the wall just behind my head. I didn't sleep much for weeks after that. My wife barely stayed in the bedroom. We started sleeping with the door open, hallway light on, just in case. Every creak in the floor, every settling noise from the walls made us flinch. Even after the police assured us the man was in psychiatric care, I couldn't stop thinking about how long he'd been doing it. How many hours he'd stood there, silent behind that thin panel, watching us go about our lives, listening to every word we said, treating us like replacements for something he lost. There was no violence, no blood, nothing dramatic like in the movies. But the damage it did to how safe we felt in our own home was real. I don't know if I'll ever live in an apartment again. Not after this. You think walls protect you, but sometimes they just hide what's watching. I was excited when I signed up for driving school. It was a small place just 10 minutes from our neighborhood, tucked between a laundromat and a pet store. Nothing fancy, but convenient, and a few of my classmates had gone there before and said it was fine. I was nervous but eager to start. I wanted to get my license before summer. My first class went well. The instructor was a man in his 40s, tall, dark hair, barely spoke unless necessary. At first, he came off as strict and serious, which I actually liked. I thought it meant he would be professional. He kept his hands on his clipboard the whole time and didn't talk much besides giving directions. Turn left here, stop at the sign, watch your mirror. But as I continued with the sessions, small things started to feel off. It began with him asking if I wanted to do private lessons. He said we could use his personal car, drive around quieter areas, work on parking more. I said I didn't think it was necessary. My schedule was tight with school. He just gave a little nod but brought it up again the next time. And the next. Each time, it sounded more like a suggestion I wasn't supposed to refuse. I tried to laugh it off, saying I already had enough on my plate, but he didn't seem to get the message. Then he started calling me his best student. I didn't like how he said it, like there was something behind the words. During lessons, I caught him watching me in the rearview mirror more than he looked at the road. One time, at a stoplight, he didn't say anything for almost a minute, just stared at me through the mirror until I had to awkwardly clear my throat and ask what to do next. When I finally brought it up, told him calmly I felt a bit uncomfortable and that I preferred he kept things professional, he gave me a tight smile and said, "You know, without proper guidance, some students don't pass on time." It was subtle, but the tone made it feel like more than just a comment. I didn't respond. I just focused on driving. I told my parents. They said maybe he was just trying to be helpful. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. They said driving instructors sometimes offer more time to students who fall behind. But I wasn't falling behind. My scores were fine. My handling was improving. I didn't need extra help. After that, I started feeling nervous before each class. I watched everything. Where he looked, how close he sat, what he said. Nothing ever crossed a line completely, but it all felt like it was inching closer. And when I told him again that I didn't want private lessons, this time in a firmer tone, he went quiet for a moment and then said sharply, "Well, we'll see if you still think that way after the exam schedule comes out." I stopped answering his messages. I emailed the school, asked if I could switch to another instructor. They didn't ask many questions, just reassigned me. My next 2 lessons were with a different man, older, polite, barely said anything besides instructions. I finally felt a bit more relaxed. But 3 days later, around 7 p.m., I was in my room doing homework when I noticed headlights through the curtain. I moved to the window and saw a black car parked near the end of our driveway. It was turned off, but someone was sitting inside. The street was mostly empty. The car didn't move. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but when I leaned a bit and focused, I caught the plate. It was his car. Same numbers I'd seen when he picked me up before. My stomach dropped. I didn't tell anyone that night. The car left after maybe 10 minutes. I told myself maybe he was just driving by. Maybe it was a coincidence. But it happened again 2 days later. Different time, this time closer to 9 p.m. Same car, same spot. I turned off the lights in my room before peeking out. He didn't get out, just sat there. After about 5 minutes, the engine started and he pulled away slowly. After the 3rd time, I started writing down the dates and times. Once it happened while my parents were watching TV downstairs. I didn't say anything. I just went to the kitchen and locked the back door. Every time it happened, he never knocked, never called, just sat there. Sometimes the lights were on, sometimes off. One evening, I was taking out the trash when I saw the car again. This time it was further down the street, near the corner. I didn't stop walking, didn't look directly at it, but I could feel the eyes on me. As soon as I got back inside and looked through the front window, the car was gone. The next day, I emailed the school again and told them I was quitting the course. I'd figure out another way. They didn't ask why. I didn't give details. I just wanted it to end. The last time I saw the car was 4 nights ago. It was raining lightly, and the street was nearly empty. I was brushing my teeth when I caught the reflection of the headlights bouncing on the wet pavement outside. I moved to the living room quietly. Same car, parked again, just sitting there. I turned off the lights in the hallway and stood by the window, hidden. The driver didn't move for a while. Then suddenly, the car jerked forward, turned abruptly, and sped off into the night. A few weeks later, I saw his car parked right outside the school gates. It wasn't his teaching day. He wasn't supposed to be there. He leaned on the hood casually, like he was waiting for someone. But when our eyes met, he straightened up and waved. I didn't wave back. I walked the other way, cut through the back field and entered the school from the side entrance. That evening, I got a message from an unknown number. "Didn't know you were so shy." I blocked it immediately. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid, but then he started showing up in more places. One time, I had a session at the shared training lot. Big open space with cones and a small driving track. There were other students and instructors there, so I felt safe. Then I saw him walking between the rows of parked training cars, wearing his official jacket, nodding politely at people like everything was normal. He had no assigned lessons that day. He wasn't listed on the board. He came over, stood too close as I was practicing parking with another instructor. "You're improving," he said loudly, fake smile on his face. I didn't answer. I tried to act like I didn't see him. Later, when the session ended and most people had left, I went to the vending machine near the lot's gate. He followed me there. No one else was around. He leaned close, eyes cold, and whispered, "Keep acting like you're untouchable, and you'll regret it." Then he walked away like nothing happened. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking how he always found ways to appear near me, but never in a way I could clearly report. Everything was just below the line. No threats on record. No messages I could show. Just presence. Just pressure. Like he was always watching, always nearby. Then it escalated. I was driving back from the store one afternoon, using my brother's car. 2 bags of groceries on the passenger seat, music playing low. I noticed a black sedan in the rearview mirror, keeping close. When I switched lanes, it did too. I slowed down slightly. So did the car behind. I checked the mirror again and froze. It was him. His face. He wasn't smiling, just staring ahead. He suddenly sped up and pulled alongside me. We were both doing around 50, and he swerved closer, edging toward my lane. I veered slightly to avoid him. Then he cut in front sharply, forcing me to brake. My heart was pounding. I couldn't process what was happening. He backed off again, then came up on my right, trying to push me toward the shoulder. I hit the button on the steering wheel and called my brother on speaker. "He's following me," I said quickly. "He's trying to run me off the road." My brother told me to stay calm and get to the nearest shopping center. "Don't go home. Pull into the parking lot. I'll be there in 10. I nodded even though he couldn't see me, and took the next right toward a crowded mall. I drove fast but careful. Didn't look back. When I turned into the mall entrance, I saw his car in the rearview mirror, slowing down, then pulling away in the other direction. He was gone by the time I parked. I sat in the car until my brother arrived. He looked furious and scared at the same time. We didn't say much. I just showed him the plate number I wrote down. He drove me home. That night we talked to our parents. They finally saw it wasn't just nerves. It was real. The next morning we went to the police. The officer took our statement but seemed cautious. There was no physical contact, no direct threat they could act on. But then he showed up again near our house 2 days later. This time, my brother followed him discreetly in his own car and managed to record some footage. Same car, same street. Parked for over 15 minutes. The instructor claimed I was the one harassing him. He showed fake screenshots of a chat he said we had, full of suggestive messages. Except, I never sent them. Different numbers. Wrong phrasing. It felt like something generated or copied from somewhere else. My brother stepped in again. He worked with a friend who had access to traffic cams. They pulled footage from 3 separate evenings showing the same black car near our street, sitting parked and then leaving quickly after a few minutes. We also gathered statements from 2 neighbors who'd seen the car loitering nearby at odd hours. The clincher was a forensic review of the fake screenshots. The officer handling our case had them checked. The messages were built from pasted texts, timestamps didn't match actual phone data, and some parts of the chat were exact copies from known online message templates. In short, they were fabricated. The driving school suspended him. Internal review confirmed he had misused access to student files and violated conduct policies. The police opened an official case. He was removed from all teaching duties, and he faced charges for harassment and reckless driving. I transferred to a different driving program in another district. One-on-one, female instructor, no male staff. My parents drove me there and waited outside every session. It was quiet, slow, and careful. I finished the course in 2 months, but even now, months later, I tense up when I see a black sedan. I check plates. I double-check if someone is parked outside for too long. It's hard to shake off. I learned something from all of it. Sometimes, the most normal parts of life, like a driving lesson, can become dangerous if the wrong person gets control. And once things start going wrong, it's the quiet, unnoticed signs that matter the most. When we found that house with low rent and furniture already inside, we thought we got lucky. It was in a quiet suburb, big enough for both of us, with a nice kitchen and a small backyard that even had a few flowers already planted. The landlord said his relative used to live there but had passed away some years ago, and the place had been empty since. We didn't ask too many questions. Everything looked clean. The price was better than anything else we saw, and it was only a short drive from both our jobs. We moved in that weekend. For the first few days, it was quiet, peaceful. I remember thinking that this is what people mean when they talk about finally settling down. One of the first neighbors we met was an older woman who lived right across the street. She came by on our second day with a container of banana bread and said her name was Margaret. She looked like she was in her late 70s. Very proper. Wore a blouse even though it was hot out. Told us she'd known the person who lived here before us. Her good friend, she said. We thanked her for the bread and made small talk. She was friendly, asked if we needed anything, mentioned how the garden used to be her favorite part of this house. I figured she was just being nice. But then she started showing up more often. At first, it was just to say hello, then to drop off a few old photos she said were left behind in the house and belonged to the place. Sometimes she came over to comment on how we had arranged the living room. She never liked the couch facing that way, she said once, standing in our hallway, uninvited. I wasn't sure how to respond. I didn't even hear the door open. Turns out we'd left it unlocked. She started entering without knocking. Not every day, but enough to make it uncomfortable. Once I came out of the bathroom and found her standing in our kitchen, holding a tea towel she must have picked up from the counter. She said she thought she smelled gas and wanted to make sure we were okay. Another time, I was on a call for work and heard someone walking down the hall. I thought it was my husband home early, but it was her, just looking around the spare bedroom. She smiled when I saw her. "Just making sure you're settling in all right," she said. We didn't want to cause a scene, so we stayed polite, but we started locking the doors after that. Then the knocking started. Every day, usually around noon, always with a reason. She needed some sugar, or some salt, or to see if we had a wrench because her sink was leaking. One time she knocked and said she heard a loud bang from our house. We were both sitting in the living room watching TV at the time. Nothing had fallen. She insisted it must have been something. Then she asked if we could check the basement. Another day, she showed up with a folder full of old documents, deeds, letters, receipts, even a black and white photo of a man she claimed was her brother. He owned this house, she said, pushing the papers toward me, before she stole it from him. I asked who she was, and she said, "The one you're renting it from." Her. I told her she needed to speak to the landlord if there was some kind of problem. She just shook her head and said, "I'm just letting you know. I have rights." We called the landlord that night. He sounded annoyed, said Margaret was just lonely and a bit confused. He told us she'd lived in the neighborhood forever and probably thought she still had some say in things. "Just keep your distance," he said. "She's harmless." We tried. But after that, things started happening. Small things at first. Like we'd go to sleep and wake up to find the window in the guest room cracked open, even though I always checked and latched it shut. Once I found the back door slightly ajar in the morning, and I was sure I locked it before bed. My husband said maybe one of us forgot, but it started happening too often. One night we both double-checked all the locks together, and the next morning, the window in the kitchen was open just a crack. Then we noticed scratches on the front door lock. Not big, but definitely there. tiny marks around the keyhole, like someone had been trying to open it with the wrong key. I took a photo and showed it to my husband. He said it looked like wear and tear, but I had a bad feeling about it. That night, I heard steps outside on the front porch, real slow, just after 2 a.m. I didn't get up, just lay there listening. The motion light didn't come on, but I could hear the gravel crunching under careful feet. The next morning I found the doormat moved a few inches to the left, and there was a single piece of gravel on top of it, like someone had stood there for a while. My husband said I was reading too much into it, but even he seemed on edge. That weekend, we went to the hardware store and bought a heavy-duty bolt for the front door. He drilled it in himself while I stood watch by the window. That night, we slid it shut before going to bed. She kept coming during the day, always with some remark or demand. "Don't move the chairs around like that," she said once. "It upsets the house." I stared at her, not sure I heard correctly. She looked serious, said it again. "Leave things the way they were. The house remembers." I told her we liked it better this way. She muttered something under her breath and walked off. At first, I thought maybe it was just her way of coping with old age or loss, some weird beliefs. Maybe she missed her brother or whoever used to live here. But then one night, I woke up to the smell of something burning. Not smoke exactly, but a sharp heat smell. I jumped out of bed and ran to the kitchen. The gas burner was on, flames high, and an old metal kettle was glowing red at the bottom. The curtain right above it was already curling at the edge. My husband rushed in right behind me and turned the gas off, then yanked the curtain away before it caught. He was shaking. "You didn't use the stove, right?" I hadn't. We hadn't used it since dinner, hours ago. I called the police. They came quickly, looked around, took our statements. The back door showed signs of being forced open. The latch was bent, like it had been hit from outside, and muddy boot prints led from the yard right up to the kitchen window. Not fresh mud, but enough moisture to leave prints on the sill and floor tiles. It couldn't be a coincidence anymore. The curtain could have caught. The fire could have spread. We could have died in our sleep. Whatever was going on with her, it wasn't harmless now. We were done pretending this was just some confused woman wandering in by mistake. This was dangerous. The next morning we called the landlord again. This time I didn't wait for him to brush it off. I sent him the photos, prints, latch damage, the scorched kettle, everything. I told him we wanted him to come and see for himself. He called back later, sounded shaken, said he'd meet us there the next day, and already contacted the police again. When the officers came, they didn't waste time. 2 of them went across the street to speak to her, while another stayed with us. From the window, we saw her crying, hands shaking as she tried to explain something. Her words came in broken bursts. "He left it to me. He didn't mean them. This was our home." She wasn't shouting. She didn't seem angry. She looked lost, like she genuinely didn't understand why we were still there. She told the police we didn't belong there, that we were disrespecting her brother's memory, ruining what they built. She said we moved the wrong furniture, painted over old colors, opened doors that should have stayed closed. Paramedics arrived not long after. They spoke to her gently, then helped her into the back of their van. We watched the door shut behind her. No sirens, no cuffs, just quiet voices. One of the officers told us later she'd be taken to the hospital for evaluation. She had no next of kin they could reach. No one else in the house. Just her, living across the street and watching for years. When the house was empty, she could pretend it still belonged to her family. When we moved in, it became real that it didn't. After that night, we decided to move. We didn't argue about it. We both knew we couldn't stay. It wasn't just fear. It was the pressure of being watched, judged, and almost harmed by someone who thought she was protecting something sacred. The landlord understood. He apologized for not warning us, admitted he hadn't checked on her in years, and didn't realize how bad things had gotten. He said he'd help cover moving costs. We spent the next week packing. We didn't talk much, just focused on getting things done. I avoided looking out the window. Every time I walked past it, I half expected to see her face across the street. But her house stayed dark. On the last day, we cleaned everything carefully, wiped down all the surfaces, trimmed the backyard, even fixed the old curtain rod she'd once commented on. We returned the furniture to the layout we found it in, just in case someone else came looking with the same old memories. I don't know why, but it felt right to do it that way. As I closed the front door for the last time, I stood for a moment and looked around. The house felt quiet again, like it had before she started coming by. I felt a strange kind of pity for her. Not sympathy, just a numb understanding. She wasn't evil. She just couldn't let go. But I still think about that night. If we hadn't woken up, if the flame had reached the curtain, if we'd brushed off that burning smell for even a few more minutes. Her obsession wasn't just sad, it was nearly fatal. We drove away with the moving truck rolling behind us, turning one last time at the corner. I didn't look back after that. I don't think either of us did. We just wanted to be done with it. With her. With the house. We're in a new place now. Smaller, plainer. No old furniture. No strange neighbors. I sleep better, even if I still check the stove twice every night. Just in case. I got a night shift job in tech support at a big company. Nothing fancy, just helping people set up their equipment or walking them through simple troubleshooting. Most calls were boring, just people forgetting to plug things in or pressing the wrong button. After a while, I started zoning out during shifts, sipping bad coffee, scrolling on my phone between calls. It was quiet, predictable. Then, one night, exactly at 2:13 a.m., I got a call that didn't follow the usual pattern. The voice was calm but tense, like someone who was trying hard to stay composed. He said his name was Mike and asked about an issue with his modem. It was a pretty standard question, and I gave him the same walkthrough I'd done 100 times. But a minute in, he changed the topic. He asked me if I liked working night shifts. I brushed it off, said something short, then guided him back to the problem. After a bit of silence, he thanked me and hung up. The next night, at exactly 2:13 again, the same voice called. This time, he introduced himself as Greg. The voice was unmistakably the same cadence, same low tone. I figured maybe he forgot he already called, but the topic was different. Now he claimed to be having issues with his printer. A few minutes in, he asked if I lived alone. I laughed it off like it was just a joke. People get weird at night sometimes. It happened again the next night. Same time, same voice, different name, new equipment issue. Every time, he started with some problem that sort of made sense, but eventually it turned into him asking something off. Stuff like, "Do you usually take that long to get home?" Or, "You ever wonder if anyone follows you from the station?" I started getting a weird feeling, but I kept things polite. Maybe it was some lonely guy messing around. Still, it stuck with me after the shift. By the 5th night, I started watching the clock more closely. Sure enough, 2:13 a.m., ring. He called himself Daniel this time. I cut the small talk and asked if he'd called before. He laughed softly and said, "Maybe. I talk to a lot of people." Then silence. Then he asked, "Did you enjoy your sandwich today?" I froze. I had eaten alone, outside the building, far from any cameras. I didn't answer. He stayed quiet a few seconds, then asked about my walk home. I ended the call. I talked to my supervisor after that. She pulled the call logs. The number was different each time. A burner app, maybe. The call location couldn't be tracked either. Always came up as unknown. She told me not to worry too much. Maybe a prankster. She said I could block any repeat callers if I felt uncomfortable. But I knew it wouldn't help. He wasn't calling from the same number twice. Colleagues overheard and started joking about my secret admirer. I laughed along just to keep things normal. But inside, I felt a constant tension. I started arriving at work earlier, checking every corner of the building, watching who came in and out. I even started looking over my shoulder on my walk from the station. The calls didn't stop. Every single night, 2:13 a.m. Always a new name. Always the same voice. And each time, more personal. He described what I wore the previous day. He asked about my sister visiting last weekend. He mentioned a scar on my arm I usually keep covered. He even asked, "That keychain on your bag, was it a gift?" I started doubting everyone. Maybe someone at work was feeding him this stuff. Or maybe someone followed me home. I checked my social media, deleted a bunch of posts, locked everything down. Still, the calls kept coming. My supervisor agreed to keep an eye on things, but there was nothing concrete. No number to trace, no name to report, just a voice. One night he said, "That corner near the grocery store, you always slow down there." He was right. It was a dark spot with bad lighting, and I always felt uneasy walking past it. I didn't reply. He chuckled quietly, then said, "Get some rest. Long shift tomorrow." I hung up without saying anything. I couldn't sleep after that. I started staying at a friend's place sometimes, switching up my routine. But every night, no matter where I was, the call came. He never missed a single one. Once, I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "Why didn't you pick up? I miss our chats." I recorded everything. Brought it to the supervisor again. She passed it up to IT. They said the calls were routed through a virtual system that scrambled origins, likely international, maybe spoofed. I asked if someone inside could access my shift schedule and personal details. They said theoretically yes, but only managers had that kind of access. Still, no names, no evidence. Nothing. I started writing everything down. Time of the call, what he said, what I was doing earlier that day. I cross-checked it all. He knew things I never shared with anyone. He described my route to work, what snack I bought from the vending machine. One night he said, "You didn't lock your door today. Careless." I stopped walking home. Started taking cabs. Changed my number, but the calls came through the work line. That's when I realized he wasn't guessing. He was watching. Somewhere close. I started looking at every coworker differently, wondering who knew what, who could see what I was doing during the day. Still, I had no proof. The next night, just like clockwork, the phone rang at 2:13. I stared at the screen for a full minute before picking up. The voice was calm. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "I hope you're not getting tired of me." I said nothing. He added, "It's hard keeping up with you when you keep changing places, but you'll slow down eventually." I hung up. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the office until sunrise. Just sat at my desk, staring at the phone, watching the door, listening for footsteps. One night, just after 2:13, he said my nickname. The one only a few close friends ever used. I hadn't typed it anywhere online. It wasn't on my social media, not on my work profile, not in any official file. My stomach dropped. He said it like we were old buddies catching up. Then, almost casually, he described the street outside my building. The red mailbox, the graffiti on the fence across the road. He said he liked the way the light from my kitchen window reflected off the neighbor's parked car. Then he mentioned seeing my cat on the window ledge. Said she looked sleepy. That's when I knew for sure. He was physically there, watching, not just pulling info off some database. He'd stood outside my place and looked in, maybe more than once, maybe while I was inside. I stopped going home that night, took a cab to nowhere, told the driver to keep driving for a bit, then loop around. I eventually got out at a 24-hour diner and stayed there until sunrise. At work, no one joked anymore. People started whispering when I passed. They looked at me with sympathy, some even with fear. I couldn't blame them. I looked like hell. Dark circles, jumpy, checking over my shoulder constantly. I installed a camera outside my apartment door, another one in the hallway. Started using different exits and entrances every day, just in case he was tracking me from a distance. Changed my route to work twice a week. Every alley or empty sidewalk felt like a trap. The voice still came at 2:13. Without fail. I started answering less, letting it ring. But the voicemails got worse. He talked about my friends, mentioned a jacket one of them wore when we met up. He described a shop I stopped at on my way home. Always something specific, something recent. Always just enough to prove he wasn't bluffing. Finally, my manager looped in law enforcement. They assigned a contact to my case, but there wasn't much they could do. The calls were traced to random IPs, burner apps, masked locations. Sometimes it showed up as coming from other countries. Always a dead end. No voice ID match, no pattern to follow. A friend of mine in IT took a look at the back end of our call system. He said whoever this was, he wasn't some amateur. Said he knew how to spoof numbers, hide his trail through layers of VPNs, probably rotating proxies too. We checked the employee database again, looking for any red flags. That's when my boss told me something that stuck with me. About 3 years earlier, they'd fired a tech specialist. He was caught accessing restricted parts of the system. Internal files, call records, even some employee accounts. Before they let him go, he'd threatened a few people. Said he'd expose the company, make them regret it. There were rumors that he'd blackmailed an operator, but the details were buried. They never pressed charges, just erased his access and moved on. Now, no one said outright that it was him, but it made too much sense. He had the skills, the motive, and now he had me. I was the weak point, new, low on the ladder, easier to isolate. I started replaying everything in my head, what I said during calls, what I left visible online, where I kept my routines too consistent. It all seemed like a trap I built myself, step by step. Management told me I could take some time off, offered to shift me to days, said maybe that would shake him off. But it didn't help. The messages still came. He didn't care what time I worked. It wasn't about the shift. It was about the game. And I was the only one playing with him. I lasted 2 more weeks before I quit. Told them I couldn't do it anymore. They understood. I think some of them were relieved. Nobody else wanted to be the next target. I changed everything. New phone number, new email, deleted my accounts. Got a job where I didn't have to deal with the public. No support lines, no direct contact, no online profiles. Just me, a locked desk, and a quiet routine. The first few weeks were rough. I still got a few calls from unknown numbers. I didn't answer. Blocked them. Changed SIM cards again. Eventually, the silence settled in. No more voicemails. No more midnight whispers. But I never fully relaxed. I still check my apartment camera every night. Still glance at reflections in store windows to see if someone's behind me. Still flinch a little when my phone rings from a number I don't recognize. Sometimes I wonder if he just got bored. Or maybe moved on to someone else. A new name. A new voice to torment. I don't know. No one ever confirmed if it was that ex-tech guy. No real evidence, just a trail of guesses and digital shadows. But I can't think of anyone else who would go that far, for that long, just to mess with someone like me. What scares me the most is how easy it was for everything to start. A normal night shift, a harmless call, and then one man made my entire life feel unsafe. Now every time I see my phone light up with an unknown number, I pause. I wait. Just for a second. Because I know how fast things can go from routine to horror. When I found my wallet lying in the middle of the hostel hallway, I knew something wasn't right. It had gone missing the night before. I'd already turned my bag inside out, checked under the bunk, even asked the front desk if anyone turned it in. Then suddenly, in the afternoon, my roommate came over holding it in his hand saying, "Look what I found near the showers." Nothing was missing from it. Cash was still there. Cards too. But something about the way he said it didn't sit right with me. I had just moved to a new city for a short contract job. It wasn't my ideal situation, but I needed something cheap until I could find a proper place. The hostel was bare bones. 6 bunk beds squeezed into one room, lockers that didn't really lock, shared showers that always had wet floors and flickering lights. It was the kind of place you didn't want to stay in longer than a few weeks. I didn't expect comfort, just a bed to crash in. My roommate, the one on the bottom bunk across from mine, seemed okay at first. Clean guy. Didn't snore. Said his name was Igor. He held the door for me when I came in with luggage. Offered to boil water for tea. Once he even gave me an extra blanket because I was shivering the first night. He asked where I was from, what kind of work I did, how long I was planning to stay. Nothing strange. Just small talk. I appreciated the friendliness, especially in a place like this where most people kept to themselves. But soon I started noticing how often he was around. Like, he was always there. I'd come back from work, and he'd be sitting on his bunk, reading or scrolling his phone. I'd head out early in the morning, and he'd already be dressed and sitting at the table in the corner. He never really left, and he always noticed everything. If I changed my schedule, he'd ask, "Did you switch shifts?" Or, "You came back later today?" He'd comment on what I was wearing. Once I forgot my headphones on the bed and came back to find them placed neatly on my pillow. He said, "Didn't want them to get lost." That should have been kind, but it made me uneasy. After the wallet thing, I paid more attention. I noticed that it wasn't just me. Other people in the room were losing stuff too. Nothing major at first, just power banks, socks, a missing towel. But then someone mentioned their phone charger was gone. Another guy said he swore he left his Bluetooth speaker in his locker, and now it was missing. Every time something went missing, Igor was the first one to speak up. "I'll help you look. Maybe it got mixed up in the laundry." He was always helpful. Too helpful. Then one night, I came back from a coffee shop where I'd been doing some freelance work, and my backpack felt too light. I unzipped it and realized my laptop was gone. I freaked. My laptop had all my work files, client documents, personal stuff. I ran through every place I'd been that day, retraced all my steps in my head. But I knew I'd had it with me when I came back to the hostel earlier. I even remembered placing it inside my locker before heading to the showers. Of course, Igor noticed right away. He was on his bunk, scrolling his phone, and when I opened my locker and cursed out loud, he looked up instantly. "What's wrong?" he asked. I said my laptop was gone. His face went all serious, like he was personally offended. "That's terrible. Let's look. Maybe someone took it by accident." He got off his bunk and started opening random drawers, checking behind furniture. I joined him, just going through motions. At some point, I bent down to check under the bed. As I leaned back up, my eyes landed on the top drawer of his cabinet, slightly open. I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled it open all the way. Folded clothes, a pile of t-shirts, and under them, the edge of a gray case that looked too familiar. I reached in and pulled it out. My laptop. My laptop was in his drawer, wrapped in one of his shirts like he'd tried to cushion it. He froze when he saw it. Didn't say anything at first. Then he stepped closer and said, "I was just keeping it safe. I saw someone trying to open your locker earlier. I thought I'd protect it." I didn't answer. I just stared at him, holding the laptop. My hands were shaking. He kept talking. Said something about how people steal here all the time, and he didn't want it to get taken. Said he was going to give it back but hadn't had a chance yet. His voice was calm, but he kept glancing toward the door like he was planning his next move. I backed away slowly, still holding the laptop. He didn't follow. I walked out of the room and went straight to the front desk. I raised my voice in the common room, holding the laptop for everyone to see. "It was in his drawer," I said, pointing straight at Igor. A couple of guys stood up from the table where they were eating noodles. One of them, a tall guy with a shaved head, frowned. "Wait, my earbuds went missing last week. I thought I lost them." Another added, "My charger disappeared too. He helped me look for it for like an hour." The administrator came out of the small office near the entrance, adjusting his belt and squinting like he just woke up. I explained everything fast, showing the laptop, repeating what I'd seen. Igor stood there, arms crossed, not saying much anymore. The admin didn't hesitate, called the local police right away. A couple of officers showed up about 20 minutes later. They didn't cuff him. Just asked him to open his locker and drawer. Inside, more things turned up. Stuff people recognized. A power bank. A hoodie someone thought they left in the laundry. One of the officers asked Igor why he had so many items that didn't belong to him. He just shrugged and said, "I was holding on to them. People leave stuff everywhere. I didn't want it to get stolen." Because he returned everything on the spot, and nothing had technically been stolen for profit, they didn't arrest him. The admin told him to pack his things and leave the hostel by that evening. As he gathered his stuff, he didn't argue, didn't rush, just quietly folded his shirts and stacked them neatly. As he walked out with his bag, he passed by me. He didn't say a word, but gave me this long, strange look. Not angry, not scared, just disappointed. Like I was the one who broke something between us. The next few days felt better, quieter. The new guys in the room kept to themselves. Nobody lost anything. But the weird tension didn't leave me. At night, I kept waking up thinking I heard someone outside the door. I'd check my locker twice before leaving the room. I avoided the kitchen if it was empty. I didn't even use the shower unless I saw someone else go in first. I knew I had to get out. About a week later, I finally found a small one-room apartment on the edge of the city. Nothing fancy, old wallpaper, weird smell in the hallway, and a noisy neighbor upstairs. But it was mine. I changed the locks the day I moved in. Got a secondhand desk, mattress on the floor, basic dishes. The freedom and quiet were worth it. I finally started to relax a little. No roommates, no strange eyes following me. I focused on work, ate in peace, and started sleeping through the night again. 2 days after moving in, I came home late after work and noticed something weird. The window above the kitchen counter was cracked open, just a little. Enough to let in cold air. I knew I had closed it that morning. I always checked the windows before leaving, ever since that whole hostel mess. I didn't see any damage, nothing missing, but there were faint smudges on the windowsill, like someone had touched it with dirty hands. And on the ledge outside, A small, dark scuff like the edge of a shoe had scraped the paint. I walked around the apartment slowly, checking each corner, every drawer, closet, behind the shower curtain. Nothing was out of place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in there. Maybe just testing how easy it was to get in. I didn't sleep well that night. I pushed a chair under the doorknob, left the hallway light on. I told myself maybe I left the window loose. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe I was still just jumpy. The next day, I came home a bit earlier than usual. Dropped my bag on the floor, went to grab some documents from my desk. When I opened the top drawer, I froze. Right on top of my folder, sitting alone and perfectly centered, was a small piece of paper. Just one sentence, written in neat block letters. "You trust too much." I stared at it for a long time. The drawer had been closed. The paper wasn't there before. I would have seen it. Someone had opened my drawer. Someone who knew where I kept my documents. Someone who wasn't in a hurry. The window was locked this time, but the message was clear. He had been here. I didn't touch anything else. I called the local precinct and explained everything to the officer who came. Middle-aged guy, tired eyes. He looked around, checked the locks, inspected the windows. "No forced entry," he said. "Could have been a copied key, or a window when it was unlocked earlier." He asked if I had any proof, but I didn't. Just a note, just a feeling, just the pattern. He gave me a tired shrug and said, "If you feel unsafe, you should think about moving. Maybe somewhere with better security. But there's not much we can do unless something happens again." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair by the door, lights on, holding a cheap metal flashlight like it was a weapon. Nothing happened, no sounds, no more notes. But that didn't help. The next morning, I went to the hardware store and bought a second lock, a bar for the window, a doorstop alarm. I started looking for a new place again. This time, a building with a doorman, cameras, something. I don't care if the rent's higher. I still don't know how he got in. Maybe he followed me when I moved. Maybe he waited nearby and tried the window the first night. Maybe he never really left. But I know it was him. The way the note was written. The quiet judgment in that sentence. Just like the look he gave me when he left the hostel. Now, every time I hear a creak at night or see a flicker on the hallway camera, I check the locks again. I don't talk to neighbors. I don't give out my schedule. And I'll never stay in another hostel again, especially not one where someone offers to help just a little too often.